In the 41st millennium, faith is the ultimate weapon and the final shield against the darkness between the stars. A billion voices cry out to the God Emperors every second, their devotion forming a psychic bulwark against annihilation. But what happens when a different god, ancient, jealous, and equally unforgiving, forces its avatar through the skin of reality into a universe already drowning in zealotry? The answer came screaming through the stained glass windows of the Cathedral of Blessed Compliance on Sanctum Tertius. Marc Spector didn't remember the transition. One moment he'd been locked in combat with the sorcerer Khonshu in a crumbling temple in Cairo, desperate to prevent the ritual that would sever Khonshu's connection to Earth. The next, reality inverted like a turned pocket, colors bleeding into shapes that shouldn't exist. And he was falling through a kaleidoscope of impossible geometries that his fractured mind somehow processed as screaming faces made of starlight. Then, impact. Stone and mortar exploded around him as he crashed through ornate glass, depicting some armored giant on a golden throne. His body cratered into the chapel floor hard enough to pulverize marble, scattering a congregation of gaunt worshippers in gray robes. Marc's enhanced durability absorbed the shock, but barely. His ribs screamed protest and something warm trickled from his nose. He rolled to his feet with trained instinct, ceramic crescent darts already in hand, white cape billowing around him like a shroud. The chapel stank of incense and something else. Something organic and wrong that made his skin crawl with recognition he couldn't quite place. "You're too slow, Marc," Stephen Grant's voice whispered in his mind, the refined personality analyzing tactical data with museum curator precision. "Look at their hands. 4 fingers on some, 5 on others. The ratio is wrong." Marc's eyes tracked the congregation as they scrambled away from him. Stephen was right. The proportions were off. Some of the worshippers had elongated heads beneath their hoods. Others moved with too fluid grace, their robes not quite concealing the wrongness of their anatomy. "Not our problem," Jake Lockley's rougher voice interjected. "We need to figure out where the hell Khonshu dumped us and get back before Khonshu decides we're expendable." But Khonshu's presence in Marc's mind felt muffled, like hearing the moon god's imperious commands through water, and the psychic weight that usually pressed against his consciousness had diminished to a distant pressure, as if something vast and terrible was drowning out the Egyptian deity's voice. The congregation had stopped fleeing. Instead, they formed a semicircle around him, and Marc's combat instincts flared as he recognized predatory positioning. These weren't panicked civilians. They were pack hunters. "Unclean," one of them hissed, pulling back its hood to reveal a face that made Marc's stomach turn. Bulbous eyes on a skull stretched too long, skin with a purplish tint, and when its lips peeled back, rows of needle teeth gleamed in the candlelight. "It bears the touch of the false emperor's enemies. The star children will feast." Marc moved before conscious thought, muscle memory from 1,000 street fights taking over. His crescent dart sang through the air and buried itself in the creature's throat. It went down choking, purple-black blood spattering the prayer benches. The rest surged forward as one. He'd fought cultists before, death cults, demon worshippers, the usual parade of lunatics who thought tentacles and ritual sacrifice would solve their problems. But these things moved with horrifying synchronization, their attacks coordinated without visible communication. Marc's enhanced reflexes let him deflect the first wave, his truncheon cracking skulls and breaking limbs with efficient brutality. But there were too many, and they kept coming with suicidal determination. A clawed hand raked across his chest, shredding Kevlar and drawing blood. Marc drove his elbow into the attacker's face, feeling bone crumple. Sangs then pivoted to kick another into the stone wall hard enough to leave a crater. His cape whipped out, the weighted edges catching a hybrid across the throat and sending it sprawling. "These aren't human," Stephen observed with clinical detachment. "Not entirely. Genetic modification, perhaps. Or they're connected. Marc realized aloud, breathing hard as he put down 2 more with brutal efficiency. They're moving like they share one brain. That's when the psychic pressure hit. It slammed into his mind like a tidal wave, a unified consciousness attempting to pull him into its embrace. Marc had trained himself to resist psychic intrusion. Khonshu's presence had ironically made him more resistant to other mental influences. But this was different. This wasn't trying to control him, it was trying to absorb him, to make him part of something vast and hungry and utterly alien. Marc's fragmented psyche recoiled. Stephen, Marc, and Jake suddenly existed as distinct voices screaming in unified rejection, their fractured nature creating mental static that disrupted the hive mind's grip. The attacking cultists stumbled, their coordination faltering for just a moment. It was enough. Marc exploded into motion, his truncheon rising and falling with mechanical precision. Bodies hit the floor, purple blood painted white ceramic. By the time the last hybrid collapsed, Marc stood alone in a chapel that looked like an abattoir, chest heaving, white costume splattered with alien ichor. The silence pressed in, broken only by his ragged breathing and the distant sound of what might have been sirens or screaming. Marc looked down at the corpses, but really studied them for the first time. Beneath the robes, some were more human than others. Some had extra arms, others had skulls that suggested they'd never been human at all. "Where the hell are we?" Jake muttered. Before Marc could answer, the chapel's main doors exploded inward. Armored figures poured through, carrying weapons that looked like rifles crossed with religious icons. They wore black armor marked with skulls and purity seals, and their movements spoke of military discipline. "On your knees, witch!" one of them barked, his weapon trained on Marc's chest. "By the authority of the Holy Ordos, you're under arrest for demonic corruption and murder of the Emperor's faithful." Marc looked at the dead hybrids, then at the soldiers, then at the shattered window depicting the Golden Throne. "Oh," he said softly. "No, this is going to be complicated. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions where madness becomes salvation and alien gods clash with the Imperium's iron faith, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the moon's judgment in the dark millennium." The lead soldier's finger tightened on the trigger, and Marc prepared to explain why killing these faithful had been absolutely necessary, assuming they'd listen before shooting. He had a feeling they wouldn't. The soldiers didn't shoot immediately, which Marc counted as a minor victory. Their weapons, bulky things that hummed with barely contained energy, remained trained on him with unwavering discipline. Whatever military force these people represented, they knew their business. "I said on your knees," the lead soldier repeated, his voice distorted by the helmet's Vox grille. Through the eye lenses, Marc caught a glimpse of augmented optics glowing red in the dim chapel light. Marc raised his hands slowly, crescent darts still visible in his grip. "I'm not your enemy. These things attacked me first. Look at them. Really look. They're not human." "Lies of the demon." Another soldier moved forward, weapon never wavering. "We witnessed your desecration of the cathedral. We saw you slaughter the faithful at prayer." "The faithful?" Marc gestured at the nearest corpse with his chin, careful not to make any sudden movements. "That one has 4 arms and a skull like a..." His words died as one of the soldiers prodded the body with his boot, rolling it over. In death, the hybrid's features had softened. The elongated skull looked almost human now, the purplish tint of the skin fading to something that could have been mistaken for poor lighting. The extra arms were tucked beneath the robe, hidden from casual inspection. "I see a dead citizen of the Imperium," the lead soldier said coldly. "Murdered by a witch thing wearing demon skin and speaking in tongues." "You've got to be kidding me." Jake's voice dripped with frustration in Marc's mind. "They can't see it. Or they won't." "Genetic camouflage," Stephen theorized. "Or perhaps localized psychic influence. If these creatures are part of a hive mind, They might be projecting a false image even in death. Marc's jaw tightened. He'd been in impossible situations before, but usually he had some frame of reference. Here, he didn't even know what planet he was on, let alone what rules governed this clearly dystopian society. The architecture, the weapons, the fanatic devotion in the soldiers' voices, everything screamed of a civilization built on oppression and religious zealotry. "I'm not a demon," Marc said carefully. "And I'm not a witch. I'm—" "Silence!" The lead soldier gestured, and two others moved forward with restraints that crackled with electricity. "You will speak only when interrogated by the proper authorities. Resistance will result in immediate execution." Marc weighed his options. He could fight, probably take down 4 or 5 before they managed to put him down. But there were at least a dozen armed soldiers, more filtering in through the doors, and he didn't know the capabilities of their weapons. The smart play was to comply, gather information, and wait for an opening. Khonshu's presence stirred in the back of his mind, a faint disapproval radiating through their muffled connection. The moon god had never approved of surrender, but Khonshu's voice was distant, distorted, and Marc had learned long ago that sometimes tactical retreat was the path to victory. "All right," he said, lowering his hands. "I'll come peacefully." The restraints snapped around his wrists with mechanical precision, sending jolts of pain through his nervous system. And Marc gritted his teeth, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. They confiscated his crescent darts and truncheon, handling them with obvious suspicion. "Xenos design?" one soldier muttered, examining a crescent dart. "Or demon-forged?" "Neither," Marc said. "They're just weapons. Tools." The lead soldier backhanded him across the face, the armored gauntlet splitting Marc's lip. "I said silence, heretic." Blood filled Marc's mouth, coppery and warm. He spat it onto the chapel floor and said nothing more. They marched him out of the cathedral into a city that made Cairo's worst slums look like paradise. The architecture was brutalist Gothic, all towering spires and gargoyle-encrusted facades that seemed designed to crush the human spirit. Smoke belched from distant factories, staining the sky a sickly yellow-gray, and the streets were crowded with masses of gray-clad citizens who parted before the soldiers like water before a ship's bow, their eyes downcast in practiced submission. Marc noticed details as they moved, propaganda posters depicting the same armored giant from the cathedral window, beneath text proclaiming, "The Emperor protects." Servo skulls, actual human skulls with mechanical components, floating overhead on anti-grav units, their eye sockets glowing with recording equipment. Public execution platforms where bodies still hung, bearing signs warning against heresy and mutation. "This place is a nightmare," Stephen whispered. "Totalitarian theocracy on a scale that makes the Spanish Inquisition look like a book club." "Notice the gene markers," Jake added. "Look at the crowds. Some of them have the same tells as the things in the chapel, and longer heads. Wrong proportions. This infestation goes deep." Marc filed that observation away. If Jake was right, and Jake's street instincts were usually sharp, then the city was compromised at a fundamental level. Whatever these creatures were, they'd infiltrated the population so thoroughly that the authorities either couldn't see it or chose not to. They descended into the Undercity through massive elevators that groaned under the weight of ancient machinery. The temperature dropped as they went deeper, and the oppressive atmosphere grew heavier. Finally, they emerged into a fortress complex carved from living rock, its walls inscribed with skulls and religious iconography that made Marc's skin crawl. "Inquisitorial Black Site Tertius 7, the lead soldier announced as massive doors ground open before them. "Or may the Emperor have mercy on your soul, demon, for we shall have none." The interior was exactly what Marc expected. Torture chambers disguised as interrogation rooms, cells that stank of old blood and despair, and the omnipresent iconography of a culture that had weaponized faith. They threw him into a cell barely large enough to stand in, the restraints still crackling around his wrists. The door sealed with a hiss of pneumatics, leaving Marc in darkness broken only by a single flickering lumen strip. He sat down on the bare stone floor, back against the wall, and took stock. His ribs ached from the crash. His lip was split. The restraints were suppressing his enhanced strength. He could feel Khonshu's power dampened even further, the connection reduced to a barely perceptible thread. "We're in trouble," Marc said aloud. "It was astute observation," Stephen replied dryly. "We're in a fascist theocracy, imprisoned by religious zealots who think we're demonic, in a city infested with actual monsters that they either can't or won't acknowledge." "And Khonshu's almost gone," Jake added. "Whatever's jamming the connection, it's getting stronger the deeper we go." Marc closed his eyes, reaching for the moon god's presence. It was there, but faint, like trying to hear a whisper during a thunderstorm. Something massive and overwhelmingly powerful was drowning out Khonshu's divine frequency. The same presence he'd felt when he first crashed through the chapel window, a psychic weight so enormous it seemed to press down on reality itself. The Emperor, Marc realized. That giant on the throne, his presence is everywhere. It's like the whole population is channeling their faith into one psychic entity. Which means Khonshu is competing with a god powered by trillions of worshippers, Stephen concluded grimly. No wonder we can barely feel him. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Marc opened his eyes as the cell door opened, revealing a figure that made the soldiers look like children playing dress-up. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, clad in power armor that bore the same skull iconography but with additional markings, an elaborate eye surrounded by arcane symbols. Her face was severe, beautiful in a predatory way, with augmented eyes that glowed with cold intelligence. She carried no visible weapons, but Marc's instincts screamed danger. "I am Inquisitor Cassia Varn of the Ordo Hereticus," she said, her voice cultured but carrying absolute authority. "So you have been accused of demonic possession, murder of imperial citizens, and heretical worship of false gods. These are capital offenses. Confession may earn you a quick death. Silence will earn you agony beyond comprehension." She stepped into the cell and Marc felt something probe at his mind. A psychic touch, delicate but invasive. Then she froze, her eyes widening fractionally. "Impossible," she breathed. "Your mind, it's fractured, shattered into pieces, yet functioning. And there's something else, something old and hungry riding behind your consciousness." Marc smiled without humor, blood still staining his teeth. "You wanted to know what I am, Inquisitor? I'm Moon Knight, avatar of Khonshu, Egyptian god of vengeance and the moon. And those things I killed? They weren't human. They were monsters wearing human skin." "So you claim," Varn said softly. "Let us discover the truth, shall we? I'm very, very good at extracting truth." Her psychic probe intensified, driving into Marc's mind like a scalpel, and he felt his personalities shift, preparing to defend their fragmented sanctuary the only way they knew how, by becoming the chaos that no unified mind could comprehend. The interrogation was about to get interesting. The psychic probe felt like ice picks driven through Marc's temples. Inquisitor Varn's mental touch was surgical, precise, nothing like the brutal, hive-mind assault from the chapel. She was searching for specific things, memories, allegiances, the source of his power. Her technique spoke of decades of practice, flaying open minds and sorting truth from lies. But Marc Spector's mind wasn't built like others. "Show me your arrival," Varn commanded, her voice echoing both in the cell and inside his skull. "Show me who sent you, what purpose you serve." Marc felt Stephen rise to the surface, the refined personality taking point with the kind of polite resistance that had infuriated museum board members and criminal interrogators alike. I'm afraid that's rather complicated, Inquisitor. You see, so the metaphysical mechanics of cross-dimensional transit aren't exactly straightforward, and without proper context regarding temporal displacement and... The probe intensified, pain spiking through Marc's consciousness. Varn's eyes narrowed. You think to deceive me with fractured thoughts? I have broken cultists who worship the Changer of Ways itself. Your parlor tricks will not... Jake Lockley surged forward, his memories flooding the connection, every back alley beating, every skull cracked against Brooklyn pavement, every time he'd driven a cab through neighborhoods where cops feared to tread. The sudden shift in perspective, from Stephen's academic detachment to Jake's brutal pragmatism, made Varn's probe stumble. "What are you?" she hissed, stepping closer. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cell's chill. 3 distinct thought patterns, 3 separate identity matrices, yet all functioning as one. This is not possession. This is not mutation. This is dissociative identity disorder, Marc said, his own voice returning as he wrestled control back. Stephen's the scholar. Jake's the survivor. I'm the soldier. We're all Marc Spector, and we're all Moon Knight, and we're all telling you the same thing. Those things in the cathedral were not human. Varn's probe retreated slightly, regrouping. You believe this truth. The conviction runs through all 3 personalities. But belief does not make reality. Her augmented eyes gleamed as she studied him. Show me what you saw. Show me these monsters as you perceived them. Marc didn't resist as she pulled the memories forward. The chapel, the congregation, the moment when hoods fell back to reveal elongated skulls, bulbous eyes, needle teeth, the wrongness of their proportions, the purple tint to their skin, the extra limbs hidden beneath robes. Varn watched the memory play out, her expression unreadable. When it finished, she stepped back, the probe withdrawing completely. The sudden absence of pressure left Marc gasping. "GENESTEALERs," she said quietly. "You killed GENESTEALER hybrids." The word meant nothing to Marc, but the way Varn said it, with a mixture of horror and grim vindication, told him everything he needed to know. She believed him, or at least she believed what he'd seen was real. "You know what they are," Marc pressed, sensing an opening. "You know they're not human." "I know of them," Varn corrected, her voice hardening. "The question is how you knew." The GENESTEALER cults employ psychic camouflage as part of their infiltration protocols. Their hybrid forms appear human to standard visual inspection and even most augmented senses. The Patriarch's psychic influence ensures that citizens see only what the cult wishes them to see. She leaned in close, her breath cold against his face. So how did an outsider, a dimensional traveler who should be blind to the nuances of warp-based deception, pierce their veil so easily? "My mind is already broken," Marc said simply. "The hive mind tried to pull me in during the fight. It couldn't. My personalities create interference, static that disrupts unified consciousness. Maybe that same static lets me see through their illusions." Varn studied him for a long moment, her augmented eyes scanning his face as if reading invisible text. "A logical hypothesis. Fractured minds have proven resistant to certain Xenos' psychic abilities before. But that raises another question." She gestured, and the restraints around Marc's wrists deactivated, clattering to the floor. He rubbed his wrists, feeling Khonshu's power flow back slightly, though still muffled by that overwhelming psychic pressure. "If you are resistant to GENESTEALER influence, and if you can identify hybrids that even my own Auspex scanners cannot reliably detect, then you are either the Emperor's providence made manifest, or the most elaborate trap ever set by the Xenos." "Third option," Jake muttered in Marc's mind. "We're just unlucky enough to land in the middle of your alien infestation." Marc voiced the thought aloud, adding, "I didn't ask to be here, Inquisitor. So one moment I was fighting a sorcerer in Cairo, the next I'm crashing through your cathedral and getting jumped by things with too many teeth." "Cairo," Varn repeated. "A city on Terra?" Terra's what we call Earth, yeah. Her expression shifted, something almost like pity crossing her severe features. Then you are further from home than you can possibly comprehend. Terra is the heart of the Imperium, the throne world of the God Emperor himself. If you truly hail from there, you have been cast across the galaxy, perhaps 50,000 light-years distant. The numbers were meaningless, but the implication was clear enough. Marc had been thrown so far from home that getting back might be impossible. He pushed the thought aside. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. "So what now?" he asked. "You kill me for heresy. Or do we talk about the actual problem? That city out there is infested, and your people can't see it." Varn's jaw tightened. "I have suspected GENESTEALER presence on Sanctum Tertius for 3 months. My investigation has been obstructed. The noble families who govern this world have proven remarkably resistant to inquisitorial scrutiny. Documents go missing. Witnesses recant. Entire bloodlines close ranks." She began pacing the small cell, her armor's servos whirring softly. "I've been forced to move carefully, to gather evidence that cannot be dismissed or destroyed. But if the cult has reached the cathedral itself, if the priesthood is compromised, then you're running out of time," Marc finished. "How long before they call in reinforcements? Do these GENESTEALERs have a fleet, an army? Worse." Varn stopped pacing, her eyes meeting his. "The GENESTEALER cult is a preparation. They are the vanguard. When their numbers reach critical mass, they send a psychic beacon into the void, a summons that draws the Tyranid High Fleet like blood draws sharks. And when the fleet arrives, Sanctum Tertius will not be conquered. It will be consumed. Every living thing on this world will be biomass for the swarm." The clinical way she described planetary extinction sent a chill down Marc's spine. This wasn't hyperbole or religious fanaticism. This was someone who had seen it happen before. "How long?" he asked. "Unknown. But if the cathedral is compromised, if the priesthood has been infiltrated, then the cult has access to the planetary Vox networks, the defense grid coordinates, the population census data." She trailed off, and the implications hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Weeks at most, perhaps less." Silence filled the cell. Marc could feel his personalities conferring internally. Stephen calculating probabilities, Jake assessing threats, while Marc himself tried to find the tactical angle. If he was stuck here, if there was no immediate way home, then he needed to survive. And if surviving meant dealing with the immediate threat. "You need someone who can see them," Marc said. "Someone who can identify hybrids without specialized equipment. Someone expendable enough that if they're wrong, or if this is all a trap, you can claim plausible deniability." Varn's lips curved into something that might have been a smile in kinder circumstances. "You are perceptive, Moon Knight." "Yes, I need exactly that." She moved to the cell door, then paused. "But understand this. I do not trust you. Your god, this Khonshu, is a warp entity by any measurable standard. That you claim Egyptian origin means nothing. Demons lie, and they lie well. The only reason you are not burning on a pyre right now is because the Emperor's providence sometimes works through the most unlikely instruments." "I've been called worse," Marc said. "I am certain you have." Varn keyed open the door. "Come. There are others you must meet. If you are to hunt GENESTEALERs in my name, you will need allies who know the Emperor's foes intimately." Marc stood, his body protesting the movement. "And if I refuse, then I will have you lobotomized, your fractured mind preserved in a servitor's shell, and deploy you as a GENESTEALER detection unit regardless." Varn's voice held no malice, only iron certainty. "At least this way, you retain your free will. Choose wisely." Marc followed her out of the cell, Stephen's voice whispering warnings, Jake cataloging exits and weapons, while Khonshu's distant presence pulsed with what might have been approval. The moon god had always appreciated those who dispensed justice through brutal necessity. They walked through corridors lined with cells, some occupied by things that barely looked human anymore, their mutations too advanced to hide. Marc caught glimpses of extra limbs, chitinous growths, eyes that reflected light like an insect's compound vision. The later generation hybrids, Varn explained. The first and second generation can pass for human with the cult's psychic assistance. By the fourth generation, they are more xenos than man. These are bound for purging, public execution to demonstrate the Emperor's justice. And the cult just lets you execute their members. The cult sacrifices them to maintain the deception. Better to lose a few advanced hybrids than expose the entire conspiracy. She led him up a spiral staircase, the architecture shifting from prison to something more tactical. Armories, briefing rooms, sparring chambers. It is a war of shadows, Moon Knight, one we have been losing. They emerged into a chamber where figures waited in the darkness. Marc's enhanced senses picked up details, massive armored shapes, too large to be human. The scent of weapon oil and something else. Genetic modification, surgical enhancement, the smell of warriors rebuilt for eternal war. Lights blazed to life, revealing 5 figures in black armor decorated with silver insignias, a stylized eye crossed with a sword. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, their armor covered in purity seals and Xenos kill markings. They were space marines, though Marc didn't know the term yet. He only knew that these were weapons wearing human skin, predators that made the soldiers from earlier look like children. Moon Knight, Varn said formally. Meet Kill Team Orpheus of the Death Watch, the Ordo Xenos' finest alien hunters. She gestured to the lead figure, whose armor bore more kill markings than the others combined. This is Brother Sergeant Thaddeus Kane. He and his squad have purged 17 GENESTEALER cults across 3 sectors. If anyone can verify your claims and test your worthiness, it is them. Kane's helmet tilted, now examining Marc with senses that probably saw in a dozen spectrums beyond human perception. When he spoke, his voice was a rumbling bass that seemed to vibrate in Marc's chest. So this is the demon witch who sees what we cannot? Kane took a step forward, armored boots shaking the floor. Inquisitor Varn speaks highly of your unique perception, but the Death Watch does not accept alien sympathizers or warp-touched heretics into our operations. You will be tested, Moon Knight. Tested until you break or prove yourself worthy of the Emperor's service. Marc met the Space Marine's gaze through his helmet lenses, refusing to be intimidated despite the size difference. I don't serve your Emperor. I serve Khonshu, but if your Emperor's enemies are the things I killed in that chapel, then we have common cause. Test me however you want. Just make it quick. Those GENESTEALERs aren't going to purge themselves. For a long moment, Kane said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a sound like grinding boulders. Bold words from one so small. Very well, little moon priest. You will accompany us into the deep underhive. We hunt a pure strain GENESTEALER that has eluded us for 2 weeks. If you can track it, identify it, and survive the encounter, we will consider your worth proven. And if I can't, then you will die screaming in the dark, and we will know you were just another warp-spawned liar. Kane turned to his squad. Arm him. Standard combat loadout. If he survives the descent, we'll see if he can fight. One of the other Space Marines approached, carrying weapons that looked like they'd been designed for someone of Marc's size. A matte black combat knife and a compact weapon that resembled a pistol crossed with a religious icon. Bolt pistol, the Marine said. 8 rounds of mass-reactive ammunition. Aim for center mass. The Emperor's wrath does the rest. Marc took the weapons, feeling their weight, testing their balance. Not his usual arsenal, but he'd worked with worse. When do we leave? He asked. Kane's helmet turned toward a massive bay door at the chamber's far end. Now. The Underhive waits for no one, and the GENESTEALERs are most active in the dead hours when the labor shifts end. With the Emperor's blessing and your supposed gift, we will finally corner our prey. Marc checked the bolt pistol's chamber, ensuring it was loaded. Tyranid felt his personalities align for the first time since arriving in this nightmare future. Stephen's tactical analysis, Jake's street-fighting instinct, and Marc's military training merged into a singular purpose. He was going hunting. And whether it was for Khonshu, for survival, or simply because killing monsters was what he did best, Moon Knight would prove that some things remained constant across dimensions. Justice, in the end, always came with a body count. The descent into the Underhive took 2 hours on a cargo elevator that groaned like a dying animal. Marc stood among the Death Watch kill team, his white costume a stark contrast to their black armor, feeling like a child standing among statues. The Space Marines hadn't removed their helmets, their enhanced senses constantly scanning for threats as the elevator plunged deeper into Sanctum Tertius's industrial bowels. "The Underhive is where the Forgotten dwell," Brother Kane said, his voice cutting through the elevator's mechanical screaming. "Mutants, criminals, those deemed unworthy of the Emperor's light. The GENESTEALER cult thrives here because no one above cares what happens in the depths. The infected simply disappear into the masses." Marc watched the levels flash by through gaps in the elevator cage. Massive factory floors where thousands of workers toiled in conditions that would have triggered labor violations in any sane society. Except there was no sanity here, only endless production in service of some distant war machine. He caught glimpses of overseers with shock mauls, of workers with missing limbs replaced by crude augmetics, of children barely old enough to walk sorting scrap metal with bleeding hands. "You allow this?" Marc asked quietly. "Children working in those conditions?" "We allow survival," Brother Galeth replied, the Space Marine's voice carrying less certainty than Kane's. "The Imperium numbers in the trillions across 1,000,000 worlds. Every citizen serves according to their capacity. The alternative is extinction by 1,000 Xenos horrors. Would you prefer pretty lies while the darkness consumes everything?" "I'd prefer not enslaving children," Marc shot back. "Then you are naive," Kane said flatly. "The Imperium is not kind, Moon Knight. It is necessary. Without structure, without sacrifice, humanity would have been extinct 10,000 years ago. You may not like our methods, but they have kept our species alive in a galaxy that wants us dead." Stephen's voice whispered analysis in Marc's mind. "Fascist rationalization. They've constructed an entire philosophy around brutality, convinced themselves that cruelty equals survival. Classic authoritarian bootstrap narrative." But Jake's response was more pragmatic. "Yeah, but look around. This place is fighting things that eat souls and convert people into alien hybrids. Maybe it takes monsters to fight monsters." Marc said nothing more. The moral calculus of this universe was so far removed from anything he'd experienced that judgment felt almost meaningless. He filed it away for later consideration and focused on the immediate mission. The elevator finally shuddered to a halt, its doors grinding open onto a scene from mankind's oldest nightmares. The Underhive stretched before them like a subterranean city, its buildings stacked haphazardly into the cavern walls, connected by bridges of rusted metal and frayed cables. The air was thick with chemical runoff and human waste, the smell so overpowering that Marc's eyes watered. Dim bioluminescent fungi provided the only light, casting everything in sickly green shadows. So the sounds were worse, the constant drip of contaminated water, distant screams, the skittering of things unseen moving through the darkness. And underneath it all, barely perceptible, the whisper of unified consciousness Marc had felt in the chapel. The hive mind was here, watching, waiting. "Brother Nathaniel," Kane commanded, "Auspex sweep." One of the Space Marines raised a handheld device that looked like a scanner crossed with a holy relic. It hummed, its screen flickering with data. Multiple life signs, Sergeant. Standard underhive population density. No distinct GENESTEALER signatures, but... He paused, frowning. Interference, psychic static, consistent with cult presence, but I cannot triangulate the source. That's where I come in, Marc said, closing his eyes and reaching for the sensation he'd felt before. The hive mind's touch was subtle down here, diffused across hundreds or thousands of connected minds. But his fractured consciousness could feel the edges of it, wrongness hiding beneath mundane human misery. He pointed toward a section of the underhive where buildings clustered more densely. There, the psychic pressure is strongest in that direction. Whatever's generating the interference, it's close to that sector. Kane studied him for a moment, then nodded. Squad, combat formation Epsilon. Moon Knight, center position. If you betray us or prove false, you will die before you can scream. Move out. They advanced into the underhive as a coordinated unit, the Space Marine's armor servos nearly silent despite their bulk. Marc moved with them, his enhanced reflexes letting him keep pace, as though his heartbeat quickened as they passed deeper into hostile territory. The underhive's inhabitants scattered before the Death Watch like rats before fire. Marc caught glimpses of their faces in the fungal light, gaunt, desperate, marked by mutation and disease. But some of them had those telltale signs. Proportions slightly wrong, eyes with an alien gleam, movements too fluid for malnourished workers. Hybrids in the population, Marc murmured. First and second generation, maybe 1 in every 20. The Emperor's mercy, Brother Galeth breathed. That many. The infection has progressed further than we estimated. Stay focused, Kane ordered. We hunt the pure strain, not the chaff. Once we eliminate the primary specimen, and we can organize a proper purge. They moved through a marketplace where vendors sold things Marc couldn't identify. Alien meat, scavenged technology, drugs that probably dissolved brain matter. Everywhere, the underhive's denizens watched the Death Watch, with expressions caught between fear and hatred. Some made religious gestures, warding off evil. Others simply vanished into the shadows. Marc's instincts prickled. We're being observed, not just by civilians. Affirmative, Brother Nathaniel confirmed, his auspex bleating warnings. Movement in the infrastructure, above us, below us. They're boxing us in. Let them try, Kane said, his voice carrying dark amusement. The Emperor's angels fear no Xeno's ambush. The attack came 30 seconds later. They dropped from the ceiling, GENESTEALERs in their purer forms, no less human than the hybrids in the chapel. These had 4 arms ending in rending claws, chitinous carapaces that gleamed purple-black, and eyeless faces dominated by fanged maws. They moved with horrifying speed, their alien bodies designed for close quarters killing. The Death Watch met them with bolter fire that turned the marketplace into an abattoir. Mass reactive rounds detonated inside GENESTEALER bodies, spraying ichor and chitin across the stalls. Marc added his own fire, his bolt pistol bucking in his grip as he targeted a GENESTEALER launching itself at Brother Galeth. The round caught it mid-leap, exploding its torso and sending it crashing into a support beam. Good shot, Galeth acknowledged, his own bolter never ceasing fire. But more GENESTEALERs poured from the shadows. They were coordinated, and their movements synchronized by the hive mind, attacking from multiple angles to overwhelm the Death Watch's fields of fire. Marc felt the psychic pressure intensify. The Patriarch, or whatever controlled these creatures, was throwing everything at them, trying to drown them in bodies. A GENESTEALER broke through the bolter fire, its claws slashing toward Marc's throat. He ducked, feeling the air displacement as talons passed inches from his head, then drove his combat knife upward into what he hoped was a vital area. Purple blood fountained, burning his hands like acid, but the GENESTEALER went down thrashing. "Fall back to defensive position," Cain roared, his thunder hammer crackling with energy as he pulped a GENESTEALER with a single swing. "They're trying to separate us." The Death Watch contracted into a fighting circle, eyeing their backs to each other, bolters blazing in controlled bursts. Marc found himself pressed between Brother Galeth and Brother Nathaniel, their bulk providing cover while he reloaded the bolt pistol with hands slick with alien blood. Then the psychic assault hit. It wasn't the gentle probing Inquisitor Varn had used. This was a battering ram of unified consciousness trying to pulverize Marc's mind into submission. The hive mind wanted him absorbed, wanted his resistance broken, wanted to turn his fractured psyche into just another node in its collective. Marc screamed, not in pain, but in defiance, as his personalities scattered across his consciousness like shrapnel. Stephen retreated into analytical distance, processing the assault as pure data. Jake became pure survival instinct, fighting on a level beneath conscious thought. And then Marc himself became the eye of the storm, the still point around which chaos orbited. The hive mind recoiled, unable to find purchase on a consciousness that refused to unify. "He's resisting," Brother Nathaniel shouted. "The Patriarch's psychic assault. He's throwing it back." Marc opened his eyes, vision swimming with afterimages. Through the psychic static, he could feel something massive approaching, not physically. Its presence was purely mental, a vast and hungry intelligence that regarded them with cold alien calculation. "The Patriarch," he gasped. "It's here, in the Underhive. It's—" The marketplace exploded as something massive burst through a building's wall. Debris rained down, crushing stalls and panicked civilians alike. Through the dust and chaos emerged a creature that made the other GENESTEALERs look like children's toys. It stood 12 feet tall on digitigrade legs, its 4 arms ending in claws the size of machetes. A crown of bony protrusions encircled its elongated skull, and when it opened its maw, rows of teeth capable of biting through ceramite gleamed in the fungal light. But worst of all were its eyes, filled with an intelligence that was both utterly alien and terrifyingly focused. The GENESTEALER Patriarch had come to defend its brood. "Contact!" Cain roared. "All fire on primary target!" Bolter rounds hammered the Patriarch's carapace, each detonation leaving craters in its armor. But it kept coming, moving with speed that defied its bulk, its psychic presence hammering at their minds while its claws promised physical destruction. Then Marc felt Khonshu's presence surge despite the dampening effect of this universe. The moon god's avatar was being challenged and even diminished. Khonshu would not tolerate such an affront. Power flooded through Marc's limbs, not the full strength he wielded under Earth's moon, but enough to matter. He charged the Patriarch, bolt pistol firing until the slide locked back empty, then threw the weapon aside and drew his combat knife. The Patriarch's psychic attention turned to him fully, and Marc felt its surprise. How could something so small, so broken, dare approach? "Because I fought gods before," Marc snarled, and drove the knife toward what he hoped was the creature's equivalent of a heart. The Patriarch caught his arm mid-strike, its grip crushing despite the Kevlar reinforcement of Marc's costume. Pain exploded through his shoulder as bones ground together. The creature's other claws rose, prepared to bisect him. Then Brother Cain's thunder hammer struck the Patriarch's back with the force of a falling meteor. The Patriarch screamed, a sound that existed both in the physical world and in the psychic realm, a wail that shattered windows and sent the remaining civilian hybrids fleeing in mindless panic. It released Marc, whirling to face this greater threat, and for a moment, the two titans, Space Marine and Alien Patriarch, stood locked in combat that shook the Underhive's foundations. Marc rolled clear, clutching his injured arm. Through the pain, he felt his personalities realigning. Stephen calculating weak points, Jake noting the Patriarch's movement patterns, while Marc himself searched for an opening. The Patriarch was faster than Cain, but the Space Marine's armor and training kept him in the fight. Each hammer strike forced the creature back, cracking carapace and spilling alien blood. But the Patriarch's claws found gaps in the armor, tearing through ceramite and drawing red human blood to mix with purple ichor. "Its legs!" Marc shouted. "The joints are weaker. Aim for mobility." Brother Galeth and the others adjusted their fire, bolter rounds chewing into the Patriarch's legs. Chitin shattered, tendons severed, and the creature's movements became less fluid, more desperate. But desperation made it no less deadly. It lashed out with psychic force, sending Brother Nathaniel crashing through a wall. Its claws caught Brother Galeth's helmet, tearing it free and leaving bloody furrows across the Space Marine's face. Marc saw his moment. The Patriarch's attention was divided, its psychic focus split between maintaining the hive mind and fighting the Death Watch. He grabbed a fallen bolter. Brother Nathaniel's weapon dropped when the psychic blast hit and aimed for the crown of bony protrusions around the Patriarch's skull. Stephen's voice provided the calculation. Those protrusions are likely psychic amplifiers, similar to certain telepathic mutants we've encountered. Destroy them, and you disrupt its control. Marc pulled the trigger. The bolter's recoil nearly dislocated his good shoulder, but the round flew true. It struck the largest protrusion and detonated, spraying bone fragments and brain matter across the marketplace. The Patriarch's psychic scream intensified, but this time it carried agony rather than rage. The hive mind's cohesion shattered, and leaving the remaining GENESTEALERs disoriented and vulnerable. The Death Watch took full advantage, their bolter fire cutting down confused aliens with brutal efficiency. Kane's thunderhammer rose one final time and came down on the Patriarch's skull with a sound like the universe cracking. The creature collapsed, its massive body twitching in death throes, alien blood pooling beneath it in spreading lakes. Silence fell over the marketplace, broken only by the groans of wounded Space Marines and the drip of contaminated water from burst pipes. "Status report," Kane commanded, breathing heavily inside his armor. "Brother Nathaniel is unconscious but alive," Brother Galeth reported, his ruined face already beginning to heal thanks to his enhanced physiology. "Brother Theron has severe lacerations. Brother Marcus is combat effective. I am functional." Kane turned to Marc, who sat against a wall clutching his injured arm. "And you, Moon Knight? You still live?" "Unfortunately," Marc said, managing a pained grin. "Is it always this much fun in the Underhive?" "No," Kane said, and Marc could hear the smile in his voice despite the helmet. "Usually it's more dangerous." He extended a massive gauntleted hand. "You fought well. You saw what we could not, tracked what our scanners missed, and adapted to combat against a foe you'd never encountered. The Emperor's providence indeed guided you to us." Marc took the offered hand, letting the Space Marine haul him to his feet. His arm throbbed with every heartbeat, probably fractured in 3 places, but adrenaline kept the worst of the pain at bay. "So, I passed your test?" "You survived it," Kane corrected. "Which is more than most can claim when facing a GENESTEALER Patriarch. Come. We must extract before the cult sends reinforcements. This is a victory, but the war is far from won." As they began the long climb back to the surface, Marc looked back at the Patriarch's corpse. Underhive scavengers were already emerging from the shadows, drawn by the promise of alien meat and salvageable technology. Within hours, all evidence of the battle would be stripped clean, consumed by the desperate masses. "How many more Patriarchs?" Marc asked. "How deep does this infection go?" "That," Inquisitor Varn's voice crackled over the Vox, "is precisely what we need you to help us discover. Well done, Moon Knight. Return to the surface. Your true work is about to begin." Marc felt Khonshu's presence pulse with approval. The moon god's avatar had proven himself in this strange new universe. But as they ascended through the layers of the Underhive, past the factories and the suffering masses, Marc couldn't shake the feeling that killing one Patriarch had merely announced his presence to something far worse. Somewhere in the darkness, the cult was watching, and they would not forget the one who had shattered their patriarch's mind and exposed their hidden brood to the Emperor's justice. The war for Sanctum Tertius had truly begun. The medical bay smelled of disinfectant and sacred oils, an odd combination that reminded Marc of churches and hospitals merged into one sterile nightmare. A servitor, half human, half machine, its eyes replaced with optical sensors, and most of its brain scooped out to make room for programming, worked on his fractured arm with mechanical precision. Marc watched the process with morbid fascination, trying not to think about the fact that this thing had once been human. The servitor will set the bone and apply a regenerative cast, Inquisitor Vaughn explained, standing nearby with her arms crossed. You'll be combat capable within 6 hours, longer for full recovery, but we don't have the luxury of time. 6 hours? Marc looked at his mangled arm, bone fragments visible through torn flesh. That should take weeks. Imperial medical technology is quite advanced when applied to valuable assets, Vaughn said. And after your performance in the Underhive, you have become valuable indeed. She gestured, and a hololithic display flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional map of Sanctum Tertius. Red markers dotted the city like a disease spreading through healthy tissue. These are confirmed or suspected GENESTEALER cult locations based on the intelligence we've gathered. 17 major concentrations across the capital hive alone. Marc studied the map, his tactical mind automatically assessing patterns. They're positioned around infrastructure choke points, water treatment, power generation, communications hubs. If they wanted to take control of the city, they could do so in less than a day, Vaughn finished. No, the cult has been patient, Moon Knight. GENESTEALERs infect populations over generations. What you see here is the result of perhaps 50 years of careful infiltration. The first patriarch likely arrived on a merchant vessel, infected a few dock workers, and from there, she made a spreading gesture. Like a cancer, growing quietly until it's too late for surgery. The servitor finished its work, stepping back with a pneumatic hiss. Marc's arm was now encased in a strange white material that felt warm to the touch, almost alive. He flexed his fingers experimentally and was surprised to find the pain had diminished to a dull ache. Synthetic bone weave infused with genetic accelerants, Vaughn explained. It will dissolve as your natural bone heals, leaving no trace. Another gift of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Her expression hardened. Now, let us discuss what comes next. Killing the Underhive Patriarch was necessary, but it has also alerted the cult to our awareness of their presence. They will accelerate their timeline. Meaning? Meaning they will attempt to send the psychic beacon to summon the Tyranid fleet sooner than planned. We have days at most before this world becomes a feeding ground for the Great Devourer. She manipulated the hololithic display, zooming in on one of the red markers, a massive structure in the noble district that looked like a fortress disguised as a cathedral. The primary cult stronghold is here. House Malvern, one of the 3 ruling families of Sanctum Tertius. They have governed this world for 6 generations. And they're all infected. Worse, they are true believers. Vaughn's voice carried disgust. The Patriarch has convinced them that the Tyranid swarm represents salvation, not extinction. They worship the hive mind as a deity, believing that being consumed will grant them eternal unity and purpose. It is a perversion of faith that would be almost admirable in its completeness if it weren't so utterly damning. Marc thought of the creatures in the chapel, their synchronized movements, their unified purpose. Unity through absorption, no more individual suffering, no more isolation, just oneness. You sound almost sympathetic, Vaughn observed coldly. I'm not. Marc met her eyes. I know what it's like to lose yourself, Inquisitor. My mind is already fragmented. Stephen, Jake, and I exist in constant negotiation over who controls this body. The idea of forced unity, of being absorbed into something that erases what makes you individual. He shook his head. That's not salvation. That's extinction with extra steps. Varn's expression softened fractionally. Then you understand why we must act decisively. House Malvern must be purged. Every member, every servant, every person who has had contact with their bloodline. It will mean killing hundreds, perhaps thousands. Many will be innocent of any conscious wrongdoing, infected without their knowledge, transformed while sleeping, their human minds slowly replaced by Xenos instinct. You're asking if I'm willing to kill people who might not know they're monsters. I'm asking if you have the strength to do what must be done, Varn corrected. The Death Watch will provide tactical support, but they are a scalpel, not a hammer. As we need someone who can infiltrate the Malvern estate, identify which members of the household are infected, and mark them for elimination. Someone whose fractured mind cannot be subverted by the cult's psychic influence. Marc stood, testing his injured arm's range of motion. The cast held firm, supporting the damaged bone, while his enhanced healing, courtesy of Khonshu's lingering blessing, accelerated the recovery process. When do we move? Tonight. House Malvern is hosting a gala to celebrate the festival of the Emperor's Ascension. The noble families will all be in attendance, along with military commanders, merchant guild representatives, and various other persons of influence. It's the perfect opportunity to identify how deep the infection goes among the planetary elite. Varn gestured, and a different hologram appeared. A woman in an elegant gown, her features aristocratic and cold. This is Lady Seraphine Malvern, current head of the house. If she is infected, and we believe she is, then she will be the new Patriarch's primary host. New Patriarch? Marc frowned. We killed one yesterday. GENESTEALER cults are redundant by design. Brother Kane's voice rumbled as the Space Marine entered the medical bay. He'd removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face with augmented eyes that glowed faintly red. The Underhive Patriarch was a lesser specimen, likely the original infected's offspring. The true Patriarch, the progenitor of this entire cult, will be far more powerful. And if Lady Malvern hosts it, she will have access to genetic material from across the noble bloodlines. The implications made Marc's stomach turn. You're saying she's breeding a super patriarch using noble genes? Not breeding, Varn corrected. Becoming. The most advanced GENESTEALER hybrids retain their human memories and intelligence while gaining Xenos strength and psychic power. Lady Malvern is likely 4th or 5th generation, human enough to pass in society, alien enough to coordinate the cult's activities across the entire planet. Marc processed this, his personalities conferring internally. Stephen noted the biological efficiency of such a strategy. Jake pointed out that it meant their target was both intelligent and deadly. And Marc himself recognized the tactical nightmare they were facing. So I go to a party, identify the alien shapeshifters among the rich and powerful, and then what? We can't just start shooting in the middle of a gala. No, Kaon agreed. No, but we can isolate key targets, extract them for interrogation, and eliminate them quietly. The Death Watch will be positioned around the perimeter. You will be inside, wearing appropriate noble attire and carrying concealed weapons. When you identify a hybrid, you will mark them using this. He held out what looked like a small silver coin. Psychic resonator. Press it into their skin. A handshake will suffice. And it will tag them with a signature our auspexes can detect. Once all targets are marked, we extract you and begin the purge. And if they realize what I'm doing, then you will die, Varn said bluntly, but not before transmitting what you've learned. Your sacrifice would still serve the Emperor's purpose. Marc took the resonator coins. There were 12 of them, each small enough to palm easily. You people really know how to motivate someone. We offer truth, not comfort, Kane said. The galaxy is a hostile place, Moon Knight. Humanity survives by being more ruthless than its enemies. If that offends your sensibilities, perhaps you should have stayed in your own dimension. Except I didn't have a choice, Marc shot back. I'm here because a sorcerer and an angry god decided to weaponize dimensional barriers. So if I'm stuck in your nightmare future, I might as well make myself useful. Vaughn almost smiled. Pragmatic. I can work with pragmatic. She handed him a data slate displaying formal wear specifications. You'll be introduced as Lord Marc Spector, a minor noble from an off-world holding. Your cover story is that you're here investigating trade opportunities. It's thin, but with the Emperor's blessing, and no one will look too closely. Marc examined the outfit displayed on the slate. Elaborate formal wear that looked like it cost more than most people on this world would earn in a lifetime. I'm going to stand out. That's the point, Vaughn said. New faces draw attention. Lady Malvern will want to assess you, determine if you're a threat or an opportunity. That's when you get close enough to tag her. And if she's as psychically powerful as you think, your fractured mind will protect you, Kayan said. We've seen the evidence. The Patriarch's psychic assault in the Underhive should have lobotomized you. Instead, you threw it back in its face. Whatever makes you resistant to mental domination will be your greatest weapon tonight. Marc nodded slowly. The plan was insane, which meant it fit perfectly with the rest of this universe's logic. How long do I have to prepare? 4 hours, Vaughn said. Use them wisely. Study the noble house structures. Memorize faces. Learn the social protocols. One misstep could expose you. No pressure then. 4 hours later, Marc barely recognized himself in the mirror. The formal attire transformed him from a street-level vigilante into something resembling nobility. Dark coat with silver embroidery, high collar bearing a fabricated house sigil, boots polished to a mirror shine. They'd even convinced him to remove his mask, though he'd negotiated keeping a domino-style facial covering in silver that matched his outfit. Lord Marcus Spector, he said to his reflection, practicing the accent Vaughn's protocol instructor had drilled into him. Charmed to make your acquaintance. You sound ridiculous, Jake muttered in his mind. Agreed, Stephen added, but technically accurate for this social stratum. Remember, excessive formality masks ignorance in aristocratic circles. When in doubt, be vague and condescending. Marc checked the concealed weapons, a compact las pistol hidden in a sleeve holster, 2 monomolecular edged daggers in his boots, and the psychic resonator coins in a hidden pocket. Not his usual loadout, but it would have to do. A knock at the door announced Vaughn's arrival. She'd also changed, trading her power armor for an elegant gown that somehow managed to look both beautiful and threatening. Her augmented eyes were hidden behind aristocratic cosmetics, but Marc could see the intelligence burning beneath the disguise. You clean up adequately, she said. The transport is ready. Their brother Kane and his kill team are already in position around the Malvern estate. Remember, you are there to observe and mark targets. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. What if Lady Malvern tries to convert me? Let her try, Vaughn said. Your resistance will be interpreted as strong will, which the cult values. They prefer leaders and visionaries, people who can strengthen the hive mind rather than simply being absorbed by it. She may even attempt to seduce you politically or romantically. Play along, gather intelligence, and mark her when the opportunity presents itself. They boarded a transport that looked like a limousine crossed with an armored personnel carrier. The interior was lavish, clearly designed for nobility, but Marc noticed the reinforced plating and weapon ports hidden beneath decorative panels. And even transportation in this universe was militarized. The journey through the upper hive was a stark contrast to the underhive's squalor. Here, buildings gleamed with precious metals, citizens wore clean clothes, and the air smelled of perfume rather than chemical runoff. But Marc's enhanced senses picked up the same wrongness he'd felt below. Subtle proportions that didn't quite match, movements too synchronized, the psychic pressure of minds linked in ways human minds shouldn't be. The infection is everywhere, he said quietly. Yes, Vaughn agreed. The question is whether we can cut it out before it kills the patient. The Malvern estate rose before them like a castle from nightmare, all Gothic spires and grotesque gargoyles. Landing platforms dotted its flanks, each receiving transports bearing nobility from across the planet. Marc spotted symbols he'd been taught to recognize: House Tertium with its three-headed eagle, House Voss with its iron chain, House Malvern itself with its intricate spiral pattern that Marc now recognized as disturbingly similar to GENESTEALER claw marks. "They're not even hiding it," he muttered. "They don't need to," Varn said. "The cult's psychic influence ensures that only those meant to see will notice. To uninfected eyes, the spiral is just decorative geometry." She handed him a small earpiece. "Direct vox to Brother Kane. If you're compromised, speak the phrase, 'The Emperor protects,' 3 times. We will extract you by force." Marc fitted the earpiece, testing the connection. Kane's voice crackled through, calm and professional. "We have eyes on you, Moon Knight. The Emperor guides your steps. Do not falter." Their transport landed on a platform where servants in Malvern livery waited. Marc and Varn disembarked with practiced nobility, and Marc was struck by how easily the Inquisitor slipped into the role of aristocratic companion. She'd done this before, he realized. Infiltrated, observed, gathered evidence before the hammer fell. The interior of the estate was obscene in its luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, artwork worth planetary GDP lined the walls, and servants moved with eerie synchronization, serving drinks and canapes to guests who laughed and schemed in equal measure. But underneath the opulence, Marc felt the hive mind's presence like a low-frequency vibration. It wasn't trying to absorb him, not yet. It was curious, examining this new variable that had appeared in its carefully constructed world. "Lord Spector," a voice called out, smooth and cultured. Marc turned to see a man approaching, tall and handsome with just a hint of wrongness around his eyes. "I am Castor Malvern, the lady's brother and seneschal of this estate. Welcome to our celebration. We so rarely receive visitors from off-world these days." Marc offered his hand, feeling the psychic resonator concealed in his palm. "The pleasure is mine. Your family's reputation precedes you." Castor's handshake was firm, and Marc pressed the resonator coin into his palm with practiced sleight of hand. The man didn't even notice, too focused on maintaining aristocratic pleasantries. One marked. "Come," Castor said, gesturing toward the ballroom. "My sister is eager to meet you. She has such an interest in new blood." The way he said "new blood" made Marc's skin crawl. But he smiled, nodded, and followed Castor deeper into the estate, each step taking him closer to the heart of the cult's power. Somewhere in his mind, Khonshu whispered warnings. Stephen calculated odds. Jake assessed exits, and Marc himself prepared for whatever horror awaited him in the Malvern ballroom. The hunt had begun. The ballroom was a cathedral to excess. Vaulted ceilings stretched 3 stories high, decorated with frescoes that depicted humanity's conquest of the stars, or at least what was supposed to be humanity's conquest. Marc's trained eye caught details the artists had hidden in plain sight. The conquered aliens in the murals had features too similar to their human conquerors. The battle scenes showed cooperation rather than domination, and the final panel depicted not victory, but unification into something neither human nor Xenos. The cult's true doctrine, painted across the ceiling where only those meant to understand would see. "Impressive, isn't it?" Castor Malvern said, following Marc's gaze. "Commissioned by my great-great-grandfather after the founding of our house. He believed that humanity's destiny lay not in isolation, but in evolution." "Evolution," Marc repeated, accepting a glass of wine from a passing servant who moved with that telltale synchronization. "An interesting philosophy in an Imperium that values genetic purity." "Oh, the Imperium has many philosophies," Castor said smoothly. "Some more enlightened than others. "Ah, but here comes my sister, Seraphine." Lady Seraphine Malvern was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, all sharp edges and cold perfection. She wore a gown that seemed to shift colors in the light, from midnight blue to deep purple, and her movements carried an inhuman grace that set every one of Marc's instincts screaming. When she smiled, her teeth were perfect. Too perfect. "Lord Spector," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. "Castor has told me so much about you. Just an off-world noble investigating trade opportunities during such a delicate time. How brave." Marc took her offered hand, feeling the psychic resonator ready in his palm. But the moment their skin touched, he felt something else. A direct psychic probe, far more subtle than the Patriarch's brutal assault, sliding through his mental defenses like a surgical instrument. His personalities scattered instinctively. Stephen erected walls of academic detachment. Jake became hostile territory, all sharp corners and violence. Marc himself became the void between them, the space where identity fractured and reformed. Seraphine's eyes widened fractionally. Her smile never wavered, but Marc felt her surprise ripple through the psychic connection. She couldn't read him, couldn't categorize him, couldn't determine if he was threat, asset, or prey. "Fascinating," she murmured, her grip tightening slightly. "You have such a complex mind, Lord Spector. So many voices, yet all singing in discord. How do you function?" "Practice," Marc said, pressing the resonator coin into her palm as he released her hand. "Therapy. Lots of therapy." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I must introduce you to the other guests. Someone with your unique perspective would add such flavor to our discussions." She linked her arm through his, steering him into the crowd with proprietary confidence. "Tell me, Lord Spector, what do you think of unity, of minds working toward a single purpose?" "Sounds efficient," Marc said carefully, aware that Vaughn was somewhere in the crowd, watching. "But I've always valued individuality, the right to disagree, to chart one's own course. Even when that course leads to suffering, to isolation." Seraphine's voice carried genuine curiosity. "Humanity is fractured, Lord Spector. 1,000,000 worlds, each pursuing its own agenda, held together only by fear of extinction. What if there was another way, a way to join together willingly, to share thoughts and experiences, to never be alone again?" "You're describing the hive mind," Marc said bluntly. Seraphine stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Around them, the crowd seemed to part unconsciously, creating a bubble of privacy. "You see clearly. Good. I dislike pretense." She studied him with those two perfect eyes. "Yes, I'm describing unity through the gifts of the Star Children. They offer salvation, Lord Spector, an end to the Emperor's tyranny, to the endless wars, or to the isolation that defines the human condition. In exchange for our flesh, they offer us immortality as part of something greater. They offer extinction," Marc countered. "I've seen what the Tyranids do. They don't preserve consciousness. They consume it. You won't be part of something greater. You'll be digested biomass." "You've been listening to the Inquisition's propaganda," Seraphine said, her voice hardening. "Let me show you the truth." Before Marc could react, she pulled him through a side door into a private gallery. The moment the door closed, the ambient noise of the ballroom vanished, replaced by oppressive silence. Marc's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed last pistol, but Seraphine raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to harm you," she said. "I want to offer you a choice. Look." She gestured toward the gallery's far wall, where a massive specimen tank dominated the space. Inside, suspended in translucent fluid, was a GENESTEALER in its pure form, but this one was different, larger, with additional limbs and a cranial structure that suggested vastly increased intelligence. Its eyes, previously eyeless in the lesser specimens, now held a disturbing awareness. "The progenitor," Seraphine said reverently, "the first of our blessed family. It came to us 3 generations ago, brought my great-grandmother the gift of transformation. She was the first to understand, to accept, to evolve." She moved closer to the tank, placing her hand against the glass. "I carry its genetic legacy. Through me, it shapes the future of this world." Marc felt the hive mind's pressure intensify, focused through Seraphine like a lens. So she was the cult's nexus, the point where human intelligence and Xenos instinct merged into something terrifyingly effective. "Why show me this?" he asked. "Because you're special," Seraphine said, turning back to him. "Your fractured mind intrigues the progenitor. It believes that your unique consciousness could strengthen the collective, add new dimensions to our unity. You could be so much more than you are, Lord Spector. No more warring personalities, no more internal strife. Just peace, purpose, belonging. At the cost of my individuality. At the cost of your suffering," she corrected. "I know what it's like to be broken, Lord Spector. I was broken once before the gift. Anxious, fearful, crushed under the weight of noble expectations. Now I am whole. Now I am strong. Let me give you that same gift." Marc felt the sincerity in her words, and it disturbed him more than any threat could have. She genuinely believed what she was saying. The cult hadn't just infected her body, it had convinced her that extinction was salvation. "I appreciate the offer," Marc said carefully, "but I've learned to live with my brokenness. It's what makes me, me." Seraphine's expression shifted, disappointment mixed with something darker. "Then you choose isolation. How unfortunate." She moved toward him with predatory grace. "The progenitor warned me that some minds cannot be persuaded. They must be taken by force." Marc's hand found the last pistol as Seraphine's form began to change. Her perfect features rippled, bone structure shifting beneath skin that took on a purple tint. Additional arms erupted from her sides, tearing through the gown's fabric, each ending in claws designed for rending flesh. "I'm still human enough to regret this," she said, her voice now carrying multiple harmonics. "But the collective must be protected." She launched herself at him with inhuman speed. Marc fired the last pistol, the last bolt burning through where her shoulder had been a microsecond before. She was faster than the underhive GENESTEALERs, her hybrid nature giving her human intelligence combined with Xenos reflexes. Her claws raked across his chest, shredding the formal coat and drawing blood. Marc twisted away, using his enhanced agility to stay ahead of her attacks while fighting in the confined space. He drew a monomolecular knife from his boot, slashing at her extended limbs. The blade bit deep, severing one of her additional arms at the elbow, and purple blood sprayed across the gallery's marble floor, and Seraphine screamed, a sound that existed both physically and psychically, calling for reinforcements. "Kane!" Marc shouted into the Vox. "I'm compromised. Gallery off the main ballroom, eastern wing." "Acknowledged." Kane's voice crackled back. "Extraction in 30 seconds. Hold position." 30 seconds. Marc dodged another slash, feeling claws pass close enough to part his hair. Seraphine was relentless, her attacks coordinated by the hive mind, each strike calculated to corner him, to force him into a position where her superior strength could overwhelm his speed. But Marc had fought gods. He'd faced Khonshu's wrath and survived, battled demons who could warp reality with a thought, gone toe-to-toe with supernatural horrors that made GENESTEALERs look like street thugs. So he let Stephen take over for a heartbeat, the scholarly personality analyzing Seraphine's attack patterns with clinical precision. Then Jake surged forward, turning analysis into brutal action. Marc's knife found the gap between ribs, driving deep into what he hoped was a vital organ. Seraphine gasped, her multiple eyes widening in pain and shock. "Impossible. You're just human, just broken and alone, and..." Broken doesn't mean weak, Marc snarled, twisting the knife, and I'm never alone. The gallery's wall exploded inward as Brother Kane and his kill team breached the estate. Bolter fire filled the space, cutting down hybrids who'd responded to Seraphine's psychic call. Marc released his knife, letting Seraphine collapse as the Death Watch secured the gallery. Target marked and confirmed hostile, Marc reported, breathing hard. Ton, Lady Seraphine Malvern is 4th-generation hybrid in Cult Nexus. The Patriarch, the progenitor, is in that tank. Kane's helmet turned toward the specimen tank, his bolter rising. Then we end this now. Wait! Marc grabbed the Space Marine's arm, or tried to. Kane was immovable as a boulder. The tank's reinforced. Bolter fire might not penetrate, and if you breach it, the progenitor could escape into the estate. Then what do you suggest? Marc looked at the progenitor suspended in its tank, at Seraphine bleeding out on the floor, at the gathered hybrids the Death Watch was systematically eliminating. His personalities conferred, reaching consensus in a heartbeat. Melter charges, he said. Superheat the entire tank. Cook the thing inside its own aquarium. No escape, no regeneration. Just complete molecular breakdown. Kayan nodded slowly. Brutal, effective. I approve. He gestured to Brother Galeth. Place the charges. Everyone else, defensive perimeter. Moon Knight, can you walk? Marc looked down at his shredded chest, at the blood soaking through what remained of his formal wear. I've had worse. That wasn't a question about your pain tolerance, Kayan said. Can you maintain combat effectiveness? Yes. Good. Because half the estate just realized we're here, and they're all coming to defend their god. Through the gallery's shattered wall, Marc could hear them, hundreds of footsteps, synchronized and purposeful. The hive mind was throwing every infected noble, every hybrid servant, every cultist in the estate at them in one desperate attempt to protect the progenitor. Brother Galeth worked quickly, in placing shaped melter charges around the tank's base, while the rest of the kill team formed a firing line at the gallery's entrance. Marc retrieved his knife from Seraphine's corpse. She'd finally stopped twitching and took position beside Brother Kane. For what it's worth, Kane said, not looking away from the approaching horde. You fought well. When this is over, if we survive, I will recommend you for full Death Watch auxiliary status. Does that come with benefits? Marc asked, checking his last pistol's charge. You get to die fighting Xenos instead of being executed as a heretic, Kane said. In the Imperium, that counts as a benefit. I really need to find a way home, Marc muttered. The first wave hit like a tsunami, hybrids in formal wear, their transformations incomplete but their rage absolute, swarmed the gallery. The bolter fire cut them down, but more kept coming, climbing over the bodies of their fallen brethren. Marc fired the last pistol until it overheated, then switched to the knife, fighting in the brutal close quarters where Space Marines struggled, but human agility excelled. He ducked under power-armored limbs, slashed at hybrid joints, used the Death Watch as mobile cover while he picked apart their attackers with surgical precision. Charges set, Brother Galeth called out. Detonation in 10 seconds. Fall back, Kane roared, and the kill team retreated in coordinated stages, their bolters never ceasing fire. Marc felt hands grab him, one of the hybrids, its face half transformed, trying to drag him into the horde. He drove his knife into its eye socket, twisted, and kicked free just as Brother Nathaniel's power fist pulverized the hybrid's skull. Move! Nathaniel shoved Marc toward the extraction point, his armor's strength sending Marc stumbling through the gallery door. The melter charges detonated with a sound like reality tearing. Superheated plasma vaporized the tank, the fluid inside, and the progenitor itself in a blast of incandescent fury. The psychic backlash hit a second later, a scream of alien agony that wasn't sound, but pure mental anguish, transmitted through the hive mind to every connected consciousness on Sanctum Tertius. Marc felt it through his fractured mind, a wave of grief and rage and terminal loss. The cult's god was dead, burned to ash in seconds, and every hybrid on the planet knew it. In the ballroom, the screaming started. The psychic backlash turned the Malvern estate into an asylum. Hybrids throughout the building collapsed, clutching their heads, shrieking in languages that predated human civilization. The hive mind's central nexus had been severed, leaving its constituent parts flailing in sudden, terrifying isolation. Marc stumbled through the chaos, supported by Brother Nathaniel's armored bulk as they fought toward the extraction point. Around them, nobles who'd seemed perfectly human moments before convulsed as their true nature became impossible to hide. Skin split to reveal chitinous armor beneath. Bones cracked and reformed into alien configurations. Eyes that had passed for human rolled back to show compound lenses. "The psychic camouflage is collapsing," Vaughn's voice crackled over the vox. She'd appeared from the crowd, her gown torn and splattered with purple blood, a plasma pistol in one hand. Without the progenitor's control, the hybrids can't maintain their human appearance. The entire planetary elite is about to be exposed. "Good," Marc said through gritted teeth, his wounded chest screaming with every step. "Let them see what their leaders really are." They burst onto a landing platform where a Death Watch Corvus Black Star, a transport that looked like a hawk crossed with a gunship, waited with engines hot. Bolter fire covered their retreat as more hybrids poured from the estate, some still wearing the tattered remains of formal wear, others having shed all pretense of humanity. Marc was hauled aboard the aircraft, the ramp closing behind them as the pilot engaged thrusters. Through the viewport, he watched the Malvern estate recede, in flames now visible in its upper floors where melter charges had ignited ancient wood and tapestries. "Status report," Kane demanded, removing his helmet to reveal a face slick with sweat despite the armor's climate control. "All team members accounted for," Brother Galeth reported. "Brother Marcus sustained moderate wounds. Brother Theron's armor is breached but functional. Moon Knight is..." He looked at Marc, who was being tended by a servitor with medical subroutines. "Alive, somehow." "Khonshu doesn't let me die easily," Marc said, wincing as the servitor's mechanical appendages probed his wounds. "Even here, even weakened, the old bird keeps me breathing." "Your god must value you highly," Cain said. "The wounds you sustained should have been fatal, and that claw strike came within millimeters of your heart." Marc looked down at the jagged tears across his chest. Purple blood mixed with red, the hybrid venom already being neutralized by the servitor's injected antibodies. "What can I say? I'm lucky." "Luck is the Emperor's providence in disguise," Cain said, a maxim that sounded well worn. "But luck alone did not win this battle. You marked the cult's leadership, identified their stronghold, and helped us destroy the progenitor before it could summon reinforcements. For an outsider, you adapt quickly." "I've had practice," Marc said. "My universe isn't exactly peaceful." The Corvus Black Star banked hard, avoiding anti-aircraft fire from somewhere below. Marc caught a glimpse of the city through the viewport. Burning buildings, crowds in the streets. That's what looked like PDF, Planetary Defense Force. Troops mobilizing throughout the hive. "The infestation was worse than we estimated," Vaughn said, studying a data slate. "Preliminary reports indicate cult presence in at least 40% of the upper hive nobility, 20% of the merchant guilds, and 15% of the PDF command structure. Without the progenitor's control, they're all reverting to baseline GENESTEALER instinct. Hide, feed, and spread." "So we didn't save the city," Marc said quietly. "We just accelerated its collapse." "We denied the cult its organized resistance," Cain corrected. "A leaderless infestation can be purged. An organized cult awaiting Tyranid reinforcement would doom the planet. We chose the lesser extinction." The casual way he said lesser extinction made Marc's stomach turn, but he couldn't argue with the logic. Better to deal with scattered hybrids than a unified cult backed by a hive fleet that could devour the entire world. "What happens now?" Marc asked. Varn looked up from her data slate, her expression grim. "Now we purge. Every suspected hybrid, every tainted bloodline, every structure that might harbor the infection. It will take weeks, perhaps months. Tens of thousands will die. Many will be innocent, infected without their knowledge or simply adjacent to the cult's influence. But there is no other way." "There's always another way," Marc argued. "Name it," Varn challenged. "Tell me how you would separate the infected from the clean when the very nature of GENESTEALER genetics makes them indistinguishable until 4th or 5th generation. Tell me how you would convince the populace that their leaders, their families, their loved ones are Xenos abominations wearing human skin. Tell me how you prevent the cult from going underground, waiting another 50 years and trying again." Marc had no answer. In his own world, he'd operated in moral grays, punishing the guilty while protecting the innocent. But here, the distinction between guilty and innocent had dissolved into something far more complicated. How guilty was someone born infected, raised in the cult's embrace, never knowing any other existence? "I don't have an answer," he admitted finally. "But that doesn't mean I have to like yours." "I don't like it either," Varn said quietly, and for the first time Marc heard genuine pain in her voice. "But I serve the Imperium. I do what must be done so that humanity survives. Now even when it costs me everything I believe in." The Corvus Black Star descended toward what looked like a fortress, the inquisitorial stronghold where Marc had first been imprisoned. The landing was smooth despite the pilot navigating through what was now effectively a war zone. As they disembarked, Marc saw the scale of the response. Military transports were launching from every platform, carrying troops toward known cult strongholds. Artillery pieces were being positioned on the fortress walls, their barrels trained on the city below, and everywhere, servo skulls darted through the air, recording, analyzing, marking targets for elimination. "Moon Knight." Kane's voice stopped Marc as he was about to follow Varn into the fortress. "A moment." Marc turned to face the Space Marine, who'd removed his helmet entirely, revealing augmented eyes that studied Marc with disturbing intensity. "You fought well today," Kane said. "Better than well. You adapted to threats you'd never encountered, overcame psychic assault that would break lesser minds, and eliminated a target that had eluded the Death Watch for months. You have earned my respect, which is not given lightly." "I sense a but coming," Marc said. "But," Kane continued, "you hesitate. You question. You seek alternatives when only decisive action will suffice. These are admirable qualities in a scholar or a diplomat. In a warrior facing Xenos extinction, they are liabilities. If you wish to survive in the 41st millennium, you must learn to act without doubt, to kill without hesitation, to accept that sometimes the innocent must die so that humanity endures." Marc met the Space Marine's gaze. "And if I can't accept that?" "Then you will die," Kayan said simply. "Or worse, your hesitation will cause others to die. The Emperor's enemies do not offer mercy to the conflicted." He placed a massive, gauntleted hand on Marc's shoulder, the gesture almost gentle despite the power behind it. "I tell you this not as a threat, but as a warning. I've seen too many good warriors broken by the galaxy's cruelty. Do not let compassion become your weakness." Before Marc could respond, alarms blared throughout the fortress. Red emergency lumens bathed the landing platforms, and Varn's voice crackled over the Vox network. "All personnel to battle stations. We have incoming contacts, multiple signatures, bearing Mark 079, velocity suggesting atmospheric entry." Kane's expression hardened. He replaced his helmet in one smooth motion, to weapons already coming to bear. "What kind of contacts?" "Tyranid bioships." Varn's voice carried barely controlled panic. "Dozens of them. The cult managed to send their beacon before we destroyed the progenitor. The Hive fleet has arrived." Marc felt his blood turn to ice. I thought we had days. We were wrong, Vaughn said. Or the cult accelerated their timeline when they sensed our investigation. It doesn't matter. Brother Kane, get your team to the Eastern Defense Batteries. Moon Knight, with me. We need every able body on the walls. Marc followed Vaughn at a run, his healing wounds protesting the movement. They climbed stairs that seemed to go on forever, emerging onto the fortress's uppermost battlements, where heavy weapons emplacements pointed toward the sky. And the sunset sky of Sanctum Tertius was beautiful. Orange and purple clouds painted across the horizon. But descending through those clouds were shapes that turned Marc's stomach. Organic spacecraft, if they could be called that, their hulls chitinous and pulsing with bioluminescence. They looked like crosses between squids and insects, massive beyond comprehension, each one trailing streams of smaller organisms like grotesque spores. Mycetic spores, Vaughn explained, following his gaze. Living drop pods. Each one contains hundreds of Tyranid organisms, hormigons, termagants, warriors, and worse. They'll saturate the city, consume everything in their path, and use the biomass to breed more. Within hours, Sanctum Tertius will be a feeding ground. How do we stop them? We don't, Vaughn said bluntly. We hold the fortress, unevacuate critical personnel and assets, and call for reinforcements. If we're very lucky and the Emperor smiles upon us, an Imperial Navy battle group will arrive before the planet is completely devoured. If not, she gestured toward the city below, where the first spores were already impacting, their organic shells splitting to disgorge horrors Marc could barely process. Creatures that looked like a fusion of insect and reptile swarmed into the streets. Some ran on 4 legs, others on 2, but all of them moved with terrifying purpose. Citizens fled screaming, but the Tyranids were faster, their claws and bioweapons cutting down anything that moved. Marc watched a PDF squad try to make a stand, their laser guns bright in the growing darkness. The Tyranids swept over them like a wave, and within seconds, nothing remained but biological matter being absorbed into pulsing flesh sacs that some of the larger creatures carried. They're harvesting, Vaughn said quietly. Every kill feeds the swarm. Every body becomes resources for more Tyranids. It's the perfect military engine, self-sustaining, endlessly adaptable, utterly without mercy. Marc felt Khonshu's presence stir in his mind, the moon god's attention drawn by the slaughter below. For once, there was no imperious demand for vengeance, no command to dispense justice, only a quiet recognition of a threat so absolute that even divine wrath seemed inadequate. How many people are in this city? Marc asked. 14 million in the capital hive alone, Vaughn said. So perhaps 40 million across the planet's various settlements. And we're just going to let them die? We're going to save who we can, Vaughn corrected. The rest will serve the Emperor in death as resources denied to the Xenos. She handed him a proper laser gun, military grade, its power cell fully charged. I'm sorry, Moon Knight. I know this isn't the war you signed up for, but it's the war we have. Marc took the weapon, its weight familiar despite the alien design. In the distance, he could see more spores falling, their impacts shaking the earth hard enough to feel even at this height. The Tyranids were coming in waves, an endless tide of chitin and hunger. I need to know something, Marc said. If we'd destroyed the cult earlier, if we'd moved faster, could we have prevented this? Vaughn was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps. Or perhaps the cult had already sent the beacon before we even identified the progenitor. Or perhaps the Hive fleet was already en route, drawn by decades of psychic preparation. In the Imperium, we rarely have the luxury of certainty. We act on incomplete information and pray the Emperor guides our choices. The fortress's main guns opened fire, their massive shells arcing through the sky to detonate among the descending bioships. Each explosion briefly illuminated the night, revealing more horrors descending from orbit. The bioships were breeding mid-flight, Marc realized with horror. producing more spores, more organisms, constantly adapting to the planet's atmosphere and defenders. Moon Knight, Kane's voice crackled over the Vox. Eastern batteries are operational, but we're detecting Tyranid assault organisms, specifically targeting the fortress. They're prioritizing eliminating organized resistance. We need you on the walls. Your ability to see through psychic deception may let you spot infiltrator organisms that our sensors miss. On my way, Marc responded, then turned to Vaughn. Stay alive, Inquisitor. You as well, she said. If nothing else, I want the chance to see if you can actually find a way home. It would be a shame for your god to lose such a capable avatar. Marc managed a grim smile and ran toward the eastern walls, where the screaming had already begun. The battle for Sanctum Tertius had begun in earnest, and Moon Knight was about to learn that in the 41st millennium, there were fates far worse than death. The eastern wall was a meat grinder. Tyranid organisms threw themselves against the fortress's defenses with mindless fury, their bodies piling so high that the newer waves used the dead as ramps to scale the fortifications. Marc crouched behind a battlement, laser gun barking in controlled bursts as he picked off hormagaunts, scythe-limbed horrors that moved faster than anything with that many legs should be able to. "Conserve ammunition," a PDF sergeant shouted, his voice raw from screaming orders. "Controlled fire. Let them get close before—" A spine round from somewhere in the swarm punched through his chest, the bioweapon exploding his torso from the inside. The sergeant collapsed, still trying to give orders through a throat full of blood and shattered bone. Marc grabbed the man's spare power cells, slotting them into his belt pouches. And around him, PDF troopers, men and women who'd probably been factory workers or merchants weeks ago, held the line with grim determination. They knew they were going to die. The only question was how many Xenos they could take with them. "Contact! Western approach!" Brother Galith's voice boomed across the Vox. The Space Marine stood at the wall's corner, his bolter creating a kill zone that nothing living crossed. "Tyranid warriors inbound. Synapse creatures. Priority targets." Marc shifted his position, looking where Galith indicated. Through the chaos, he spotted them. Larger organisms, standing upright on powerful legs, their upper limbs carrying bioweapons that pulsed with organic ammunition. But more importantly, he could feel them psychically. These were the hive mind's command nodes, the organisms that coordinated the swarm's actions. "I see them," Marc confirmed, taking careful aim. The laser gun wasn't designed for this range, but Khonshu's blessing steadied his hands, enhanced his perception. He squeezed the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. The first shot went wide. The second clipped a Tyranid warrior's shoulder, burning through chitin. The third hit its target, one of the smaller organisms that clustered around the warriors, something that looked like a floating brain with tentacles. It burst like an overripe fruit, and immediately a section of the swarm went into disarray, the hormagaunts losing coordination, colliding with each other. "Good shooting," Galith approved. "Those are neurothropes, psychic amplifiers. Take them out and sections of the swarm lose tactical cohesion." Marc filed that information away and kept firing. And his personalities worked in concert for once, Stephen identifying priority targets, Jake managing ammunition conservation, Marc himself translating analysis into kill shots. It was almost meditative, this mechanical act of survival. Point, breathe, shoot, reload. Repeat until you died, or the enemy did. A scream to his left made him turn. One of the PDF troopers was down, a lictor, some kind of chameleonic assassin beast, materialized from the shadows and now stood over the body, its scything talons dripping gore. It had gotten through the defenses, slipped past Auspex scans using whatever biological stealth systems the Tyranids had evolved. But Marc's fractured mind could see it clearly. The psychic signature was wrong, out of phase with the surrounding lifeforms. His instincts had been screaming about something being there seconds before it struck. "Lictor, left flank!" Marc shouted, pivoting and emptying half a power cell into the creature. Last bolts burned through its camouflage, revealing alien flesh beneath. The lictor shrieked and charged, faster than Marc could track. Brother Kane intercepted it mid-leap. His power fist closed around the lictor's elongated head and squeezed. Chitin cracked like porcelain, then the Space Marine slammed the creature into the stone battlement, hard enough to crater the ancient masonry. "You have good instincts," Kane said, casting the lictor's corpse over the wall. "Lictors are near invisible to standard senses. How did you know?" "My mind's too broken to fool," Marc said, reloading. "If something's using psychic camouflage or biostealth that relies on neural deception, I can feel the wrongness. Useful." Kane's helmet turned toward Marc, those inhuman optics gleaming. "Stay close to me. You'll spot what we can't see, and we'll kill what you can't handle." They fell into a rhythm, Marc calling out infiltrators and priority targets, while the Death Watch eliminated them with overwhelming firepower. The eastern wall became an abattoir, Tyranid ichor mixing with human blood, the smell of cooked flesh and burned chitin thick enough to choke on. But more kept coming, always more. "We can't hold forever," Marc said during a brief lull as the swarm reorganized. Bodies littered the approach, piled 3 deep in places, but fresh organisms were already clambering over their fallen brethren. "We don't need to hold forever," Kane replied. "Just long enough for evacuation protocols to complete. Another 6 hours, and all critical personnel will be aboard transports headed for orbit. Then the Navy can glass the planet from space, deny the Tyranids their biomass. You're going to destroy the entire world? Would you prefer we let the Hive fleet consume it, grow stronger, and continue to the next system?" Kane's voice carried no apology. "This is war, Moon Knight. Not the civilized conflicts of your dimension, where armies meet on battlefields and civilians are spared. This is war for species survival. There are no innocents, no bystanders, only those who fight and those who are consumed." Before Marc could respond, the psychic pressure he'd been feeling all night intensified tenfold. But it felt like the world's largest migraine manifesting directly in his brain, and from the way the PDF troopers around him collapsed clutching their heads, he wasn't the only one feeling it. "Hive Tyrant," Vaughn's voice crackled over the vox, strained and urgent. "Bio-Titan-class organism detected. It's coming straight for the fortress. All heavy weapons, concentrate fire." Marc forced his eyes open despite the psychic assault, and immediately wished he hadn't. Striding through the swarm like a general among soldiers came something out of nightmare. It stood 20 feet tall, its armored body bristling with bioweapons, massive wings folded against its back. But worst of all was its head, a crown of psychic amplification organs that pulsed with sickly bioluminescence, broadcasting the hive mind's will with crushing intensity. "That's what's coordinating the whole assault," Marc gasped. "Kill it, and the swarm loses its tactical center." "Easier said than done," Kane said. "Hive tyrants are among the most dangerous organisms the Tyranids produce. Brother Theron, bring the Lascanon. We need penetrating firepower." Brother Theron hefted a weapon that looked like it weighed more than Marc, its power cell humming with barely restrained energy. The Space Marine braced it against the battlement and fired, the last beam punching through the darkness like a spear of coherent light. It hit the Hive Tyrant square in the chest, burning through chitin and into the flesh beneath. The creature barely slowed. Its own bioweapons returned fire, launching organisms that Marc's mind couldn't quite process. Living ammunition that burrowed into stone and detonated, spraying acid and shrapnel. "It's regenerating," Theron reported. "The wound is closing already." "Then we wound it faster than it can heal," Kane said grimly. "All squads, focus fire on the Tyrant. Moon Knight, any weaknesses?" Marc reached out with his fractured consciousness, trying to perceive the Hive Tyrant through the psychic noise. It was difficult. The creature's presence was overwhelming, a manifestation of the hive mind's will given terrifying physical form. but his personalities scattered across his awareness, each one processing a different aspect of the threat. Stephen noticed the patterns in its bioelectric field, the way certain nodes pulsed faster than others. Jake recognized predatory movement patterns, the way it favored certain limbs. Marc himself saw how the psychic pressure emanated from specific organs. "The crown," he said. "Those bony protrusions on its head, they're psychic amplifiers like the Patriarch had. Destroy them and you cripple its ability to coordinate the swarm. It might even disrupt the hive mind's connection entirely." "Target identified," Kane said. "All units, concentrate fire on the cranial structure for the Emperor." The fortress's defenders poured fire into the hive tyrant with everything they had. Last bolts, bolter rounds, plasma bolts, even improvised explosives launched from jury-rigged catapults. The tyrant's shields, some kind of bioelectric barrier, flared and sparked, absorbing most of the damage. But not all of it. A Laskanen shot from Brother Theron punched through the barrier and shattered one of the crown's protrusions. The psychic backlash made Marc's ears ring, and across the battlefield, Tyranid organisms stumbled as their coordination wavered. The hive tyrant shrieked, a sound that existed on frequencies human ears couldn't detect, but that resonated in the soul. It abandoned tactical positioning and charged the fortress directly, its massive form shaking the earth with every step. "It's going to breach the wall," someone screamed. "Then we meet it head-on," Kayan said, drawing a power sword that crackled with energy fields. "Deathwatch, with me. Moon Knight, stay on the wall and coordinate fire support." "Like hell," Marc said, following the Space Marines as they descended into the fortress's courtyard. His laser gun was almost empty, so he drew the monomolecular knives from his boots. If he was going to die in this nightmare future, it would be on his feet, fighting, not cowering behind fortifications. And the hive tyrant crashed through the fortress's outer gate like it was made of paper. Close up, it was even more horrifying, every inch of its body designed for killing, from the bioplasma cannons mounted on its arms to the scything talons that could bisect a tank. Its eyes, multiple compound lenses that saw in spectrums beyond human comprehension, fixed on the Deathwatch with alien intelligence. Then it spoke. Not in words, but in psychic impressions that bypassed language entirely. Images flooded Marc's mind. The planet consumed, its biomass processed, the hive fleet growing stronger, humanity fleeing from world to world, always one step ahead of extinction. The inevitable heat death of the universe, when all matter would be absorbed into the great devourer, achieving the ultimate unity. "That's your sales pitch?" Marc said aloud. His personalities aligning in shared rejection. "Everything dies so your species can have a snack. At least the GENESTEALERs promise their cult members meaning. You're just cosmic locusts with delusions of grandeur." The hive tyrant's attention focused on him, and Marc felt the full weight of the hive mind's curiosity. Here was something it didn't understand, a fractured consciousness that refused unification, that chose isolation over absorption, that valued individuality over collective purpose. It wanted to study him, dissect him, understand what made his broken mind resist what should be irresistible. "Come and try," Marc said, feeling Khonshu's presence surge despite the dampening effect of this universe. The moon god was watching, and even diminished, Khonshu's avatar would not fall without making the enemy pay dearly. The hive tyrant lunged, and the Deathwatch met it with the Emperor's wrath. Brother Kane's power sword carved through chitin, drawing ichor that steamed in the night air. Brother Galith's bolter fired point-blank into the tyrant's torso, each mass-reactive shell exploding inside its body cavity. Brother Theron abandoned the Laskanen for a chain fist, the roaring blade grinding against the creature's armor. Marc stayed mobile, using his smaller size to dart beneath the tyrant's strikes, slashing at joints and soft tissue with his knives. He was a flea attacking a dragon, his wounds barely noticeable against the creature's bulk, but every cut mattered. Death by 1,000 cuts was still death. The Hive Tyrant's bioplasma cannon swiveled toward him, its barrel glowing with building charge. Marc dove behind a pile of rubble as superheated organic matter vaporized where he'd been standing, the heat so intense it turned stone to glass. "Moon Knight, status," Kane's voice, strained from combat. "Still breathing, can't say the same for this rubble pile." Another blast from the bioplasma cannon, and Marc's cover disintegrated. He rolled left, then right, staying ahead of the targeting arc by pure instinct. Jake's street-fighting experience kept him alive, turning unpredictability into a survival strategy. "The crown," Marc shouted. "We need to hit the crown." Brother Theron tried, his chain fist reaching for the Hive Tyrant's head, but the creature was too tall, its strikes too fast. The Space Marine's armor showed deep gouges where scything talons had found gaps in the ceramite. Then Marc saw his opening. See, the Hive Tyrant had reared back to strike at Brother Kane, exposing its throat and the underside of its cranial crown. It was impossible. A human couldn't jump that high, couldn't strike with enough force to matter. But Marc wasn't just human anymore. He was Moon Knight, avatar of Khonshu, dispenser of justice even in a universe that didn't know his god's name. He ran at the tyrant, using a fallen Space Marine's body as a springboard, launching himself upward with enhanced strength born of desperation and divine blessing. Time seemed to slow, or maybe his fractured mind was processing events faster than they actually occurred. His knives found purchase in the crown's damaged sections, the monomolecular edges biting through bone and psychic organs. Marc hung there for a heartbeat, gravity not yet asserting itself, one and drove both blades deep into what he prayed were vital structures. The Hive Tyrant's psychic scream was apocalyptic. It wasn't pain exactly. Tyranids didn't experience pain the way humans did. It was the hive mind itself recoiling, its connection to this critical organism disrupted, centuries of evolution and adaptation temporarily overwhelmed by unexpected assault. Marc fell, the tyrant thrashing beneath him. He hit the ground hard enough to crack ribs, the impact driving air from his lungs. Through blurred vision, he saw Brother Kane's power sword descend one final time, severing the Hive Tyrant's head in a spray of ichor and psychic discharge. Silence fell across the battlefield. The swarm, robbed of its synapse leadership, descended into confusion. Hormagaunts ran in random directions. Termagants fired at each other. The coordinated assault dissolved into chaos. "Target eliminated," Kane reported, breathing hard. "All units, press the advantage while the swarm is disorganized. Drive them back beyond the outer walls." Marc tried to stand and discovered his legs weren't cooperating. His ribs were definitely broken. He could feel bone fragments grinding against each other. Blood filled his mouth, coppery and warm. But through it all, he felt Khonshu's distant approval. Justice dispensed, monsters slain, the balance maintained, even in this alien hell. "Moon Knight," Vaughn appeared from somewhere, her face showing rare concern. "You're injured. Medics." "I'm fine," Marc lied, coughing blood. "Just need a minute." "You charged a Hive Tyrant with knives," Vaughn said, something like wonder in her voice. "That was either the bravest or most suicidal thing I've ever witnessed." "Why not both?" Jake's voice whispered in Marc's mind, dark humor even in extremis. A servitor arrived with medical equipment, and Marc felt the welcome numbness of chemical painkillers flooding his system. The fortress's defenders were already capitalizing on the swarm's disarray, driving the Tyranids back with renewed ferocity. "How long?" Marc asked, his voice slurring from the medication. 4 more hours until evacuation is complete," Vaughn said. "Can you hold?" Marc looked at the Hive Tyrant's corpse, at the scattered bodies of PDF troopers who'd given their lives holding the walls, at the Death Watch standing like legends made flesh despite their wounds. "Yeah," he said. "I can hold." Because in the end, that's what Moon Knight did. He held the line. He fought when fighting seemed hopeless. He dispensed justice when the universe demanded vengeance. Even in the 41st millennium, some things remained constant. 3 hours later, Marc stood on the battlements watching the city burn. The Tyranids had pulled back after losing their synapse coordination, but they hadn't retreated. They were adapting, the hive mind analyzing what had worked and what hadn't, breeding new organisms to counter the fortress's defenses. In the distance, Marc could see bioforms unlike anything he'd encountered before. Massive siege creatures that looked like living artillery pieces, organisms designed specifically to crack fortifications. The evacuation was proceeding according to plan, but according to plan in the Imperium meant thousands left behind, deemed non-essential or too compromised by GENESTEALER infection to risk taking off-world. Marc watched transports lift off from the fortress's inner courtyards, each one carrying administrators, tech priests, the military commanders, and their families. The people who'd actually held the walls, the PDF troopers, the menial workers, the common citizens, they weren't on those transports. "It bothers you," Brother Kane said, joining Marc at the battlement. The Space Marine had removed his helmet again, his scarred face illuminated by the fires below. The injustice of it. Who lives? Who dies? "Shouldn't it bother you?" Marc asked. "It did once," Kane admitted. "When I was still fully human, before my transformation into an Astartes. I remember watching my homeworld burn, abandoned by the Imperium because the resources required to save it exceeded its strategic value. I was one of the few chosen for recruitment, saved because my genetic compatibility made me useful. Everyone else," he gestured toward the dying city, "everyone else became acceptable losses. And you just accepted that?" "I learned to contextualize it," Kane said. "The Imperium is not just Moon Knight. It cannot afford to be. With 1,000,000 worlds to defend and enemies on every border, every decision becomes a calculation of acceptable loss versus strategic gain. We save who we can, sacrifice who we must, and pray the Emperor forgives us." Marc's hands tightened on the battlement. "In my world, we fight for everyone. Every life matters. Every person deserves—" "Your world is not drowning in the darkness of old night," Kaon interrupted. "Your world has not faced extinction by Tyranid consumption, chaos corruption, Orc Wa, Necron awakening, and a dozen other existential threats simultaneously. When you face that reality, immorality becomes a luxury you cannot afford." Before Marc could respond, the Vox crackled with urgent chatter. "Contact! Multiple bioship signatures entering atmosphere. Grid sectors 7 through 12. They're deploying directly into the city, bypassing our defensive perimeter." Marc looked up to see more mycetic spores falling through the smoke-choked sky, but these were different. Larger. Their descent controlled and precise, targeting specific locations throughout the Hive City. "They're learning," Brother Galeth reported from his position at a tactical display. "The hive mind analyzed our defenses and is now deploying organisms specifically designed to counter them. I'm reading biosignatures we haven't encountered before. New adaptations, possibly bred during the last few hours using consumed biomass." "How is that possible?" Marc demanded. "Breeding new organisms that fast?" "The Tyranids are the galaxy's ultimate adaptive predators." Vaughn's voice cut in over the Vox. She was somewhere in the fortress's command center, coordinating the final evacuation. A hive fleet can analyze, adapt, and deploy counters to threats within hours. Every world they consume makes them smarter, faster, more dangerous. This isn't even a particularly large splinter fleet, just a scouting force that responded to the cult's beacon. If the main hive fleet arrives— She left the implications hanging. One of the spores impacted directly into the fortress's western wall. The organic shell split like a grotesque egg, disgorging organisms that Marc's mind struggled to process. and they looked like GENESTEALERs, but wrong, bulkier, with additional chitin plating and what appeared to be bioweapons grafted onto their limbs. Hybrids designed specifically for siege warfare. "Breacher organisms!" someone screamed over the vox. "Western wall is compromised." "Death watch to me," Kane roared, already moving. "Moon Knight, you're still injured. Stay here and coordinate with—" "Not a chance," Marc said, falling in beside the Space Marine despite the protests from his healing ribs. "You need someone who can see through their psychic bullshit. I'm coming." They ran through the fortress's corridors, past medical bays overflowing with wounded, past servitors struggling to repair damaged systems, past civilians huddled in prayer to an emperor who seemed increasingly indifferent to their survival. The fortress was dying by inches, each breach draining resources, each casualty reducing defensive capability. The western wall had become a charnel house. The breacher organisms were tearing through PDF positions with horrifying efficiency, their enhanced armor shrugging off laser gun fire that would have killed standard GENESTEALERs. But worse, Marc could feel the psychic coordination. These creatures were being directed by something intelligent, something that understood siege tactics. There, Marc pointed to a cluster of organisms hanging back from the main assault. They looked almost like Tyranid warriors, but smaller, with cranial structures that pulsed with psychic energy. Synapse creatures. They're coordinating the breach. Kill them and... A massive claw erupted from the floor beneath him. Marc dove sideways on pure instinct, and feeling chitin brush past his head close enough to part his hair. The organism that emerged was unlike anything they'd encountered, a burrowing assault form designed to bypass defenses by tunneling through the fortress's foundations. "Trigon," Brother Theron identified it. "Subterranean assault organism. There will be more following through the tunnel it created." The Trigon was serpentine, easily 40 feet long, its body covered in armor plating that looked capable of withstanding artillery. Its maw was a nightmare of crushing mandibles and acid-secreting glands, and as it reared up, Marc could see the tunnel behind it, already disgorging more Tyranids. "Fall back," Kane ordered. "Collapse this section. Seal the breach." "We collapse this section and we lose a quarter of the fortress," Vaughn's voice protested over the vox. "We don't collapse it and we lose everything," Kane countered. "Set demolition charges. We have 90 seconds." The Death Watch formed a fighting retreat, their bolters creating a kill zone that the Tyranids had to cross. Marc added his laser gun's fire, though each shot sent jolts of pain through his broken ribs. The Trigon advanced, shrugging off bolter rounds that would have pulverized lesser organisms. Brother Marcus, the kill team's demolitions expert, worked frantically on a support column, attaching melter charges with practiced efficiency. "Charges set, 30 seconds to detonation." "Move." Kane grabbed Marc bodily, the Space Marine's strength enough to carry him like a child despite his protests. The Death Watch sprinted through the corridor as the Tyranids gave chase, the Trigon's bulk shaking the fortress with every movement. The melter charges detonated with a sound like the universe cracking. Superheated plasma vaporized the support column, and the entire western section began collapsing. Marc watched over Kane's shoulder as hundreds of tons of rockcrete and steel came down on the Tyranids, crushing the Trigon beneath debris, sealing the tunnel in molten slag. They emerged into an intact corridor, breathing hard. The Vox erupted with damage reports. Structural integrity compromised, Western batteries offline, casualty estimates climbing into the thousands. "How much longer?" Marc gasped. 2 hours, Vaughn replied. "Maybe less if we accept higher evacuation densities and leave more behind." "Then we leave more behind," Kane said without hesitation. "Better some survive than none at all." Marc wanted to argue, wanted to demand they find another way, but the words died in his throat. What alternative could he offer? Stay and fight until everyone died. The Imperium's calculus was brutal, but it was also pragmatic. Save who you can, sacrifice the rest, survive to fight another day. Mark, Stephen's voice in his mind, unusually somber. We need to discuss our situation. Not now, Stephen. Yes, now. We're nearly out of ammunition, our injuries are degrading our combat effectiveness, and Khonshu's presence is weakening further. Whatever is dampening divine connections in this universe is getting stronger the longer we stay in active combat zones. If we don't evacuate soon, we won't be able to evacuate at all. Mark realized Stephen was right. His connection to Khonshu had diminished to barely a whisper, the moon god's power reduced to a faint echo. Without that divine blessing, so he was just a trained combatant with dissociative identity disorder, fighting in a universe that considered individual human life statistically irrelevant. Inquisitor Vaughn, Mark said over the Vox, I need to know, when you evacuate, am I on the list? Silence on the channel. Long enough that Mark felt his stomach drop. That depends, Vaughn said finally. Are you willing to continue serving the Imperium's interests off-world? Your unique abilities make you valuable, Moon Knight. Valuable enough to warrant transport despite your irregular origins. And if I refuse, then you'll die with Sanctum Tertius when the Navy arrives to perform exterminatus, Vaughn said bluntly. Cyclonic torpedoes will reduce this planet to molten slag, denying the Tyranids their biomass. Now you'll have perhaps 6 hours after the last transport leaves before the bombardment begins. Mark looked at Brother Kane, who nodded confirmation. It's standard procedure for Tyranid infestation. Cauterize the wound before it can spread. So my choices are, serve the Imperium or die, Mark said. Welcome to the 41st millennium, Cain said. Where freedom is a myth and survival requires compromise. What will you choose? Mark thought of his own world, of the streets of New York where he'd dispensed Khonshu's justice. He thought of the moral lines he'd drawn, the principles he'd refused to compromise. But here, those principles seemed almost quaint. How did you maintain moral purity in a universe designed to destroy it? I'll stay, Mark said quietly. Not because I agree with your methods. Not because I accept the Imperium's brutality as necessary, but because someone needs to remember that these people, he gestured toward the dying city, they matter. They're not just statistics or acceptable losses. They're human beings who deserved better than this. Noted, Vaughn said. But you'll still evacuate. Martyrdom serves no purpose, Moon Knight. Live to fight another day, and perhaps you'll find a way to make their sacrifice meaningful. Before Mark could respond, alarms blared throughout the fortress. New contacts, the display showed, but these weren't Tyranid bioships. Imperial Navy cruiser St. Celestine's Wrath has entered orbit, the Vox officer reported, audible relief in his voice. They're hailing the fortress. Finally, Cain said, reinforcements. We may hold this world yet. But Mark felt something twist in his gut. The way Vaughn's expression had gone carefully neutral. The way the Vox officer's relief had carried undertones of resignation. Inquisitor, the Navy captain's voice crackled over the Vox. We've analyzed the Tyranid infestation and determined that ground reclamation is not feasible, requesting confirmation to proceed with exterminatus protocols. Mark's blood ran cold. Wait, they're not here to help evacuate? The evacuation is nearly complete, Vaughn said quietly. The Navy's here to ensure the Tyranids don't follow us when we leave. There are still millions of people down here. Millions who are already dead, Vaughn said, and for the first time Mark heard genuine pain in her voice. Most have been consumed by the Tyranids or are infected with GENESTEALER taint. The Navy's arrival means we have 1 hour before they begin the bombardment. 1 hour to save who we can and accept that we cannot save everyone. Mark wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it, but what good would it do? The Imperium had made its calculation, and individual outrage meant nothing against institutional momentum. Then we use that hour, Mark said. Every transport we can fill, every person we can get to the platforms. If we're going to murder a world, we at least owe it to these people to try. Kane placed a massive hand on Marc's shoulder. You have the heart of a warrior, Moon Knight. Perhaps even the heart of a hero, but heroes die quickly in the 41st millennium. Remember that. I've died before, Marc said, feeling Khonshu's distant presence pulse with grim approval. It never seems to stick. They had 1 hour to save a world that was already dead. It wasn't enough time. It would never be enough time. But it was all they had, and Moon Knight would be damned if he didn't use every second of it. The final hour became a blur of organized chaos. Marc ran through the fortress's lower levels where refugees had gathered, thousands of them, packed into spaces designed for hundreds, their faces showing the hollow-eyed resignation of people who knew they'd been abandoned. PDF troopers tried to maintain order, but discipline was fracturing as soldiers realized they too would be left behind. "Listen to me," Marc shouted, climbing onto a cargo container to address the crowd. His ribs screamed protest, but he forced the pain down. "The transports can take more people. If you can walk, if you can climb, get to the landing platforms now. Don't wait for permission, don't wait for orders, just move." "Who are you to give orders?" a PDF officer challenged, his laser gun half raised. "You're not Imperial Command. You're not even human. Yes, you're some Xenos-touched witch who—" Brother Kane's armored form appeared behind the officer, the Space Marine's presence radiating barely controlled violence. "He speaks with the authority of the Death Watch. You will obey, or I will execute you for insubordination during a crisis. Choose quickly." The officer went pale and snapped to attention. "Sir, yes, sir." "Good," Kayan said. "Now organize these civilians into orderly columns and get them moving. You have 40 minutes before this fortress becomes a tomb." The crowd surged toward the exits, desperation overcoming paralysis. Marc jumped down from the container, wincing as the impact jolted his injuries. Vaughn appeared from the crowd, her aristocratic disguise abandoned for practical combat gear. "The last official transports are loading now," she said. "But there are still tens of thousands in the lower hive who will never make it to the fortress in time. The Navy is already positioning for optimal bombardment trajectory." "Then we get creative," Marc said. "Cargo haulers, industrial lifters, anything that can achieve orbit. Strip out the safety features, pack them beyond capacity, and launch them. Most will suffer catastrophic failure during ascent," Vaughn said. "Decompression, structural collapse, life support failure. Most will die here for certain," Marc interrupted. "At least this way they have a chance. Isn't that what the Imperium is supposed to be about? Survival at any cost?" Vaughn stared at him for a moment, then actually smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her severe features. "You're learning. Brother Kane, can your tech marines override the safety protocols on the industrial craft?" "It will take time we don't have," Kane said, "but I'll make it work. Moon Knight, you're with me. If we're going to save these people, we need to move fast." They sprinted toward the fortress's industrial bay, where massive cargo haulers sat dormant. These weren't elegant ships. They were flying boxes designed to move ore and manufactured goods between the planet and orbital stations. But they had engines, and they had cargo capacity. Brother Marcus and Brother Nathaniel were already there, their armor's technical interface cables plugged into the hauler's control systems. "Safety interlocks are extensive," Marcus reported. "These vessels are designed to refuse flight if passenger capacity exceeds safety parameters." "Override everything," Kayan ordered. "Life support, structural integrity warnings, all of it. If it can fly, we make it fly." "That's heresy against the machine god's sacred designs," a tech priest protested, his multiple mechadendrites writhing in agitation. "Then charge me with heresy after everyone's evacuated," Kayan said. "Work!" The tech priest's facial augmetics flickered with what might have been indignation, but he began interfacing with the systems anyway. Marc watched lines of code scroll across displays, incomprehensible machine language that apparently constituted prayer in this universe. Marc, Jake's voice in his mind, quieter than usual. We're not going to save everyone. You know that, right? Even with these ships, we'll barely make a dent in the population. I know, Marc thought back. But we save who we can. That has to mean something. Does it? Stephen's voice, clinical but not unkind. In a universe this vast, this brutal, does saving a few thousand matter when billions die every day across 1 million worlds? It matters to them, Marc insisted. It has to matter. The first hauler's engines coughed to life, bellowing exhaust into the bay. Refugees began flooding in, guided by PDF troopers who'd abandoned their posts to help. They crammed into cargo spaces never meant for human occupation, packed so tightly there was barely room to breathe. Launch, Kayan ordered. Get them to the Navy cruiser before the bombardment begins. The hauler lifted ponderously, its engines straining under the weight. Through the bay's massive doors, Marc could see it climb toward the sky, trailing smoke and prayers in equal measure. 2 more haulers followed, though each packed with desperate humanity. 20 minutes until exterminatus, Vaughn reported. The Navy is losing patience. The Fleet Admiral is demanding we evacuate immediately. Tell him we need more time, Marc said. I've told him 3 times. He's stopped responding to my Vox hails. Vaughn's expression was grim. Marc, we have to go. The last official transport is holding for us, but not for much longer. Marc looked at the crowd still flooding into the bay. Thousands more, all hoping for a space on ships that were already overloaded. How could he walk away from them? How could he choose his own survival over theirs? Go, he said to Vaughn and Kane. Get your people out. I'll launch the last haulers and catch the final transport. Don't be stupid, Kane said. You'll never make it in time. Maybe not, Marc admitted. But I have to try. Kane studied him for a long moment, then removed something from his belt. A small metallic token marked with the Death Watch insignia. If you survive this, if you make it off-world, show this to any Imperial authority. It marks you as an auxiliary operative under Ordo Xenos protection. It won't make you popular, but it might keep you alive. Marc took the token, feeling its weight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Kane said. Survival in the Imperium is its own punishment. You may wish you died here. He extended a gauntleted hand, and Marc shook it, his own hand disappearing in the Space Marine's grip. But you fought well, Moon Knight. Better than most who've worn the Emperor's colors for decades. Perhaps your god chose wisely when he made you his avatar. The Death Watch withdrew, other armored forms disappearing toward the main landing platforms. Vaughn lingered a moment longer. For what it's worth, she said quietly. You've shown me something I'd almost forgotten. That compassion doesn't have to be weakness. That mercy can coexist with necessity. The Imperium needs more like you, Moon Knight, not fewer. If I survive, I'll work on that recruitment drive, Marc said. Vaughn actually laughed, a sound Marc suspected she didn't make often. Then she was gone, her footsteps echoing away into the fortress's depths. Marc turned back to the crowd, to the terrified faces, to the children clutching parents who couldn't promise them safety. He'd made his choice. Now he had to live with it, or die trying. Everyone who can fit, get on these haulers, he shouted. No questions, no credentials, just go. Tech priests. Launch on my mark. The next 15 minutes were chaos incarnate. Haulers launching one after another, each one a desperate gamble against physics and fate. Some made it to orbit intact. Others suffered catastrophic failures, their hulls breaching in the upper atmosphere, their passengers lost to the void. But some was better than none. Marc stood at the bay's edge, watching the last hauler climb toward the stars. The fortress was nearly empty now, just scattered PDF troopers too wounded to evacuate and civilians who'd never made it to the platforms in time. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear explosions. The Tyranids had breached another section, and with most defenders gone, there was nothing to stop them. 10 minutes to Exterminatus, the Vox crackled, automated warnings replacing human voices. All personnel evacuate immediately. Emperor's mercy to those who remain. Marc started running toward the main landing platforms, following the route Varn had taken. His ribs protested every step, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The fortress was dying around him, lights flickering, structural supports groaning, the sound of Tyranids drawing closer. He rounded a corner and nearly collided with a child, a girl no older than 8, covered in soot and crying silently. She must have gotten separated from her family in the chaos. "Hey," Marc said, kneeling despite the pain. "What's your name?" "Sarah," the girl whispered. "Okay, Sarah, I'm Marc. We're going to get you out of here, but you have to run as fast as you can. Can you do that?" She nodded, and Marc took her hand. They ran together through corridors that were becoming tombs, or past bodies of PDF troopers who'd held positions until the end, past servitors still mechanically performing functions in a fortress that would soon cease to exist. The landing platform appeared ahead, where a single transport waited, its engines already howling. Marc could see Varn at the ramp, waving frantically. "Go!" he shouted to Sarah, pushing her forward. "Run to the lady in the armor!" The girl sprinted across the platform, and Varn caught her, pulling her aboard. Marc put on a final burst of speed, his lungs burning, his vision narrowing to a tunnel focused on that closing ramp. A screech behind him made him turn. A GENESTEALER, one of the later generation hybrids, more Xenos than human, had emerged from the fortress, drawn by the sound of engines. It was between Marc and the transport, its claws flexing. 5 minutes to Exterminatus, the automated voice announced cheerfully. Marc drew his last weapons, the monomolecular knives, their edges still stained with Tyranid ichor. The GENESTEALER crouched, ready to pounce. Then bolter fire from the transport cut it down, Brother Galith visible at the ramp with his weapon raised. "Move, Moon Knight, we're not leaving without you." Marc didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted past the GENESTEALER's twitching corpse, feeling the transport's thrusters burning the platform as it prepared for immediate launch. Hands grabbed him, Space Marines, PDF troopers, Varn herself, and hauled him aboard. The ramp closed. The transport launched with bone-crushing acceleration, and through the viewport, Marc watched Sanctum Tertius fall away, in a world of 14 million souls about to be reduced to ash and memory. 2 minutes to Exterminatus, the Vox announced. The transport cleared the atmosphere, and Marc saw the Navy cruiser St. Celestine's Wrath hanging in orbit like a cathedral of destruction. Its lance batteries were charging, preparing to rain apocalypse on the planet below. 1 minute to Exterminatus. Marc closed his eyes. He'd saved thousands, but millions remained. Children like Sarah, separated from families and dying alone. PDF troopers who'd held the walls expecting relief that never came. Civilians who'd believed the Imperium would protect them. Exterminatus commencing. The Emperor protects. The lance batteries fired. Lances of coherent light capable of vaporizing mountains struck Sanctum Tertius's surface, igniting its atmosphere. Cyclonic torpedoes followed, each one carrying viral payloads and fusion warheads. The planet began to die, its surface cracking, its oceans boiling, everything that had ever lived there erased in cleansing fire. Marc felt Khonshu's presence stir, the moon god finally finding his voice again now that they were free of the planet's psychic interference. The Egyptian deity said nothing, but Marc felt approval mixed with disappointment. Justice had been served. The GENESTEALERs were dead, the Tyranid advance halted, but the price had been a world. Was it worth it? Marc asked aloud. No one answered, because there was no answer. In the 41st millennium, such questions were luxuries that no one could afford. The transport docked with the Navy cruiser, and Marc stumbled off onto a deck where survivors were being processed. Sarah was there, and reunited with her mother, who'd somehow made it aboard an earlier transport. The girl saw Marc and waved, smiling through tears. At least one family survived intact. At least that was something. Vaughn appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. "The Fleet Admiral has granted us passage to the system's edge. From there, we'll transfer to an inquisitorial vessel headed for the Tertius Sector Command. Your talents will be evaluated for future deployment." "Future deployment," Marc repeated. "You mean more worlds like this? More impossible choices?" "Yes," Vaughn said simply. "Welcome to service in the Ordo Xenos, Moon Knight. Your war has just begun." Marc looked at the Death Watch token in his hand, feeling its weight. He thought of Khonshu, of the streets of New York, where justice had been simpler. But that world was impossibly far away now, separated by dimensions and perhaps by something even more insurmountable, the fundamental difference in what justice meant. "Then I guess I'd better learn how to fight in hell," Marc said quietly. Brother Kane appeared, his armor scored and dented, but the warrior himself unbowed. "The Imperium breaks everyone eventually, Moon Knight. The question is what you become when the breaking is done. Will you become like us? Hard, practical, willing to sacrifice anything for survival? Or will you hold on to your principles and watch them cost lives you could have saved with harder choices?" "I don't know," Marc admitted. "Ask me after the next world dies." "There will always be a next world," Cain said. "That's the one certainty in the 41st millennium. The Imperium grinds on, planets fall, and we who serve make our peace with being architects of necessary evil." Marc had no response to that. He simply stood at the viewport, watching Sanctum Tertius burn, committing its death to memory alongside every other injustice he'd witnessed. Khonshu demanded vengeance for the innocent, but in this universe, the innocent were an endangered species. The cruiser's warp engines engaged, tearing a hole in reality to carry them away from the dying world. Marc felt the transition, his fractured mind processing the impossibility of faster-than-light travel through a dimension of nightmares. The warp, Vaughn called it. A place where demons dwelled and reality was optional. Just another day in the 41st millennium. As the ship translated into warp space, Marc made himself a promise. He would survive, he would adapt, then he would learn to fight in this nightmare future. But he would not become like them. He would not accept that brutality was the only path, that compassion was weakness, that individual lives were mere statistics. Khonshu's justice would find a way, even here, even in a universe that had forgotten what justice meant. Or he would die trying to teach them. In the aftermath of Sanctum Tertius's fall, Marc Spector, Moon Knight, avatar of Khonshu, found himself adrift in a universe that defied everything he'd once believed about heroism. The Imperium had granted him sanctuary, not out of mercy, but because his fractured mind made him a useful weapon against psychic threats. His ability to resist GENESTEALER influence, to pierce their camouflage, to fight when trained soldiers faltered. These were assets the Inquisition could not afford to waste. Yet the Death Watch inducted him as an auxiliary operative, a role without precedent but created out of necessity. He would never wear the black armor of a true kill team member, would never undergo the genetic modifications that created space marines. But he would fight alongside them, hunt Xenos across the stars, and dispense a form of justice that bore only passing resemblance to what he'd once served. Inquisitor Vaughn became something between handler and ally, recognizing in Marc a kindred spirit, someone who questioned the Imperium's brutality while still serving its cause. She taught him the galaxy's harsh realities, that a million worlds couldn't all be saved, that triage was the only rational response to endless crisis, that sometimes the Emperor's mercy meant a quick death instead of slow extinction. But Marc refused to surrender his principles entirely. On every world where GENESTEALER cults festered, he pushed for alternatives to exterminatus. Sometimes he succeeded, identifying cult leadership early enough for surgical strikes. Other times he failed and watched planets burn anyway. Each failure hardened him, but never broke him. His fractured mind, the very thing that made him vulnerable in his own universe, became his greatest strength here, a chaos that tyranny and unity alike could not subvert. Khonshu's presence remained diminished in this universe, the God Emperor's overwhelming psychic weight drowning out the Egyptian deity's voice. But in quiet moments between battles, Marc felt the moon god's approval. Justice was being served, even if its methods had grown darker. Vengeance was being delivered, though even if its targets sometimes wore human faces. The question that haunted Marc's dreams, transmitted through the warp's nightmares during faster-than-light travel, was whether he was dispensing justice or merely surviving. Had he become a hero in the 41st millennium's bleakest sense, saving who he could while accepting that most would die? Or had he simply become another instrument of the Imperium's endless grind, his ideals worn away by necessity until only pragmatic brutality remained? The answer, he suspected, lay somewhere between. In this universe, heroism looked like holding a crumbling wall while civilians evacuated. It looked like killing infected children before they could summon horrors from beyond the stars. It looked like accepting that you couldn't save everyone and fighting anyway for the few you could reach. The Moon Knight had purged a GENESTEALER cult, but the victory tasted like ash. Sanctum Tertius was dead, its 14 million souls reduced to radiation and memory. But thousands had survived, refugees scattered across the sector, carrying with them the knowledge that someone had fought for them even when the Imperium had written them off. That had to mean something. In a universe where meaning itself was under siege by the forces of entropy and alien hunger, even small victories mattered. As the inquisitorial vessel carried Marc toward his next assignment, another world, another cult, another impossible choice, he stood before a viewport, watching the warp's impossible colors swirl past. His reflection showed a man still wearing Moon Knight's white, though now stained with the purple ichor of Tyranid blood. Still fighting, still serving justice, but in a galaxy that barely remembered what the word meant. Somewhere across the dimensional barriers, in a reality impossibly far away, Khonshu's moon still rose over New York City. Marc wondered if he would ever see it again, or if his war in the 41st millennium would consume the rest of his existence. Either way, Moon Knight would endure, fractured but unbroken, questioning but still fighting, a sliver of mercy in an unmerciful universe, proving that even in the darkest millennium, some things remained worth dying for. The Emperor protects those who serve without question, but Khonshu's justice protects those the Emperor has forgotten. And in the end, perhaps that was the only heroism the galaxy had left. The Emperor protects. More stories await. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.